just about everybody, and it's 1 o'clock. So what do you say we get started? Doug, can you kick it off for us?
Yes. Could we all stand and pledge allegiance, and followed by the national anthem? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
They've all. Welcome to the beautiful city of Columbia here. I want to welcome everybody and also let you know that Gil will not be here today, but he will be here tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and give a quick welcoming to everyone here and just kind of give you an update of some of the things that Gil and I have had a chance to do over the last couple of weeks. As you know, we had a all chairs meeting in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, and it's a great event. Didn't have a lot of chance to go around and do a lot of sightseeing, but we did get a chance to sit down and do business. And I'm just going to briefly go over a couple of things here. We had a very unique meeting in the fact that our meeting was also with the Environmental Management Advisory Board. This was the first time I've had a chance, and I don't know whether or not it was the first time they've ever met together, our environmental site-specific advisory board along with the Environmental Management Advisory Board. But we had a great meeting together with them. David Borak, who is the DFO for our side, and Jennifer McCloskey was the DFO for the EMAP side of the house. One of the first, I guess you could say in a way, important guest that we had a chance to talk with was Paul DeBar, and Paul is one of the undersecretaries of science for the Department of Energy. And he had a lot of interesting things to talk about. He kind of briefly talked about most of the 17 national labs that we have throughout the country here. And he also talked about how contractors, along with technology, are being tied together for the remediation of some of the nuclear sites that we have. We also had Ann White, who is the Undersecretary also of Environmental Management, and she was very pleased with most of the work that's being done on most of the sites. She was very pleased, of course, with the budget, and that's going to be another subject, I guess, that's going to be talked about for a while. And I'm going to leave all of that talking to Gil. But overall, Ann White was very pleased with the overall budget that we received as a team. She also talked about the contractors in closing out deals, closing out projects. She was big on that. And she also highlighted our site here at Savannah River and how we were able, the salt waste processing facility was able to take care of their project and do it, you know, ahead and way above budget. On Wednesday, we attended a national cleanup workshop that was mainly attended by a lot of contractors, but they did have a lot of important guests there, including our site manager out here, Mike Bundy, along with other site managers, but it was mainly for a lot of the contractors that were in attendance there at the workshop. One of the events that really kind of stood out with me was we had a chance to attend a national nuclear cleanup caucus, which was held there at the Rayborn building right there on Capitol Hill. And that was one of the most exciting parts of the trip for me. They had a lot of congressmen there, and they talked a whole lot of business about environmental cleanup. So it was a great trip. We enjoyed it. The only issue was because of the hurricane, we had to come back a day earlier, so we came back on Thursday instead of Friday. But most of what I got from the meetings was the fact that everybody out there is doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as environmental management is concerned. We were well represented by all of the members that came up from Savannah River. And I just want to thank all of our team, from James on down, Delisa and everyone, Chelsea, excuse me, and for the great support that you all have given us. And without that, if you don't have any questions to me, that's all I have for you all. James, it's all yours.
Did anyone have any questions for Doug about the trip and the chairs meeting? No? Are we all here? We're going to get here, right? Don't worry. We're going to get fired up. So we've got a great meeting coming today and tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to Pam Mark's SWPF presentation this afternoon. If you remember, that's the presentation that she wanted to give in July on, you know, just the general status of SWPF and talk a little bit about the valves. She wasn't able to make it then, but she's going to be here today and give you that presentation. We've got 3 draft recommendations, 2 of them from FDSR, so from the, going to be pulling on some of the pollinator information that you heard about by Gene Rhodes with the SREL update. Can't wait to talk about those. And then there's also a draft recommendation from the chairs meeting. And so I think there will be a great discussion on that. Nevada had a great project that they worked on, and we can talk some more about that this afternoon, but headquarters love the idea. And I think you guys are going to have some real good input on what we can do as well. Any questions about the agenda that we have today? All right, so let's cover our meeting rules real quick. I'm going to ask you to hold all questions and comments until the end of the presentation. That just helps us keep on our agenda. Help us adhere to the agenda just by staying on topic again. Please don't dominate the discussion or have side conversations. State your name and affiliation when speaking into the microphone so that we can get it accurately down for the minutes. Listen to and respect other people's points of view. Participate and ask questions to seek clarification. Make your comments at a microphone, please. And put your phones and pagers on silent so that they're not going off in the middle of the meeting. One other thing that I want to make you aware of is that, of course, this meeting is being recorded. It is being streamed on the internet. And so if you're within 5 feet of somebody talking, there's probably going to be a camera pointed to you. So just please keep that in mind. Dave went, oh. If you need it, restrooms are out in the hall and to the left when you step out of the door. Any questions about what we're doing today? No? All right. Mr. Johnson, would you give us the DOE update?
Certainly. Well, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with you in Columbia today. Probably more happy than most of you. I live in Lexington, so my commute is going to be real short this afternoon. Most of you already know, but for those who aren't aware, CAB meets 6 times per year. We're moving the meeting sites each time to make sure people all around the state has access to the CAB and to the information that we're providing. Hurricane Florence update. Certainly our thoughts and prayers are with those folks that were directly impacted and now those that may be indirectly impacted by the flooding that's occurring. At the site, we suffered no real impacts or issues from the hurricane. Pretty significant effort went into preparing for the hurricane and its arrival, but thankfully we had no impacts at the site level. And one thing that's not on the update briefing that's in front of you, this is on the SRS NNSA study. If you remember back in late May, early June timeframe, there was a letter issued by NA1 stating that there would be a study conducted to look at future work for NNSA at Savannah River. Mike Budney, the site manager, myself, as well as some folks at the headquarters level are working with NNSA on this study. A little bit later this afternoon, a little after 3, you'll see me step out of the room. I have to go and participate in a meeting that we have on that study. Not that I'm disinterested in the CAB, but that's going to be my reason for why I'm having to step out. Mike's out of the office this week, so I'm having to sort of double and triple duty on a few things. But from a progress standpoint on the site, we're continuing to make progress on the multi-year campaign that we started last year on the road repair work on the site. I think I told you the last time I spoke, some of the roads have not been repaired within the last 20 years. So it's a welcomed effort across the site. For FY18, we were working on Road C, which is the primary road from Jackson. It provides access to the administrative area or B area on the site, as well as to H Canyon Tank Farms, the site training facility, DWPF, SWPF, as well as Saltstone. We had to make some temporary traffic shifts in order to do the work, and the detours, traffic shifts and detours, and it caused a few issues at the start, mostly inconvenience to the site employees. However, we've worked through those issues and the work is progressing pretty well there on site. When you were doing a lot of the repaving work, as you may know, for the top surface of the road, many times you will have to mill that down. And so as we're doing some of the work in 2018 here, rather than taking those millings to a landfill, we were able to reuse those millings. The Adder Road on site, we were able to avoid almost 9,400 tons of millings being sent to a landfill by reusing it on the Adder Road. Adder is part of the security training range there on site. Contracts, the M&O operations contract, follow-on contract, the draft RFP for the M&O contract was released on August 21st. And this was in advance of the SRS contract that will expire in July of 2019. We held a technical workshop on August 1st to make all the potential bidders aware of some of the accomplishments we've had on site, but mostly to make them aware of the challenges that we face on the site. The feedback that we received from the participants, and I believe it was on the order of, I want to say it was about 100 different companies that were represented there at the technical workshop. We were able to utilize the feedback from them and finalizing the draft RFP. We had a pre-solicitation conference and site tour for the M&O contract that was scheduled for last week, but we ended up having to postpone it because of the threat of the hurricane at the time. We've not yet rescheduled a date for that pre-solicitation conference, but we hope to have something out pretty shortly on it. Liquid waste, that acquisition process is continuing on this. This is the one where, remember, we made an award last October. It got protested. We received revised proposals, and we have worked through the evaluation of those revised proposals, and we are pretty close to being able to make an announcement on the liquid waste. For the paramilitary security contract, that contract expires in the October of 2019. We have a draft RFP that's being developed and should be released shortly. Budget for 2018, since we met with you last, we've obviously received all of the funding, and certainly should have since we're sitting here a few days from the end of the fiscal year. But we did receive all of the funding for FY 2018. And for FY19, the President signed the minibus on this past Friday. Now, I know we received slightly less, for Savannah River, we received slightly less than what was in the President's request. We received on the order of, I think, 28 million or so. And this was specifically in the nuclear materials account for the site. So we are meeting with the senior managers and contractor. We originally planned on it being on October 1st, but now we're meeting on the 26th to take a look at where we're going to make adjustments as a result of being 28 million less than what we'd requested for 2019. For 2020, we're in the budget planning process across the DOE complex now, and this is getting prepared for the President's budget that's set to be released in February of 2019. So typically at any given time, we're working on 3 years funding. This reminds us it was 18, 19, and 20. Now, progress on site within the mission areas, nuclear materials. Each canyon is continuing with 3 separate processes underway. This is dissolution of the HIFER, or high flux isotope reactor cores, dissolution and processing of the material test reactor fuel, and the target residue material from Canada. We've had some delays due to operational issues with the transfers. This is on the material test reactor fuel, but we're working through them with only a slight schedule delay. Plutonium downblending for 2018. We were able to downblend 24 cans, 3013 cans. In 2018, we had a higher number that was originally projected, but we revised that to 10 so that we would be able to focus on supporting the one metric ton removal of plutonium from the state of South Carolina. For the liquid waste program, the Defense Waste Processing Facility is in an outage for steam and routine maintenance. Waste inventory in the melter feed tank and batch processing tanks been processed. These tanks are at heel as the facility began the outage. DWPF poured a total of 15 canisters and leak tested 13 during FY18. For the MCU, or modular caustic side solvent extraction unit, is currently in an outage to replace the effluent coalescer. MCU processed a little over 141,000 gallons of salt solution in FY18. With respect to glass waste double stacking, the project to expand storage space in the glass waste storage building 1 is moving forward. As of September 15th, we had 296 canisters double stacked during FY18, which brings us to a total of 500 canisters double stacked to date. We've had another 287 positions that have been modified in FY18, giving us a total of 782 positions that have been modified to receive the double stack canisters. Saltstone facility processed a little over 275,000 gallons of decontaminated salt in FY18. For the 3H evaporator, resumed operations a little earlier than we'd mentioned at the last CAB meeting. Resumed operation at the end of July rather than in the mid-August time frame. And this is the facility, if you remember, where we discovered there were some additional leaks after the evaporator had been repaired. However, we were able to work with the regulators and were able to operate the facility. What we're finding now is that the new leak sites are actually exhibiting less leakage than what we had anticipated. To date, it's a little less than 1 gallon of leakage that we've seen during the resumed operations. Now, the operations are progressing under normal operations, but with enhanced controls. Basically, there's additional effort being made to monitor the leak sites. And we have initiated the procurement of materials for a spare evaporator to replace the current 3H. For ticker, or the tank closure season removal facility, all ticker unit modules have been installed. Setup testing will be completed by the end of this month, and the remaining activities continued on schedule, including work on tank 10 and safety analyses. The technology demonstration is planned to begin by the end of the calendar year. Salt stone disposal unit number 7, excavation for the foundation is complete, and construction of the lower mud mat has begun. Proposals for cell constructions have been received and are under evaluation. For the True Waste program, we were able to get a shipment out to WIP in August, and we're working with WIP to schedule more shipments during this calendar year. SWPF, you'll get a full update from Pam during her briefing this afternoon, but a few things I'd like to highlight. Obviously, SWPF is integral to salt waste processing here on the site, and we're focusing on achieving operations of SWPF by January 2021. SWPF is undergoing rigorous startup and commissioning activities to identify Savannah River National Laboratory. There is an effort underway between SRNL and USC Aiken. This is on the collegiate affiliate program, basically where a memorandum of understanding has been signed, and this is going to allow some SRNL retirees to collaborate with USC Aiken in a number of ways. They will be able to teach at USC Aiken, as well as provide some mentorship to students there at USC Aiken. And just a couple more things. Greenway Energy License technology. SRNL is licensed as hydrogen isotope separation technology to Greenway Energy for use in the commercial laboratory. This system, the thermal cycling absorption process, was actually invented in 1980 by Savannah River National Laboratory. Also on the laboratory, this is on the safety pause. The lab has lifted its final compensatory actions put in place as part of the safety pause and officially transitioned out of the safety pause. SRNL is launching a quarterly refocus meeting designed to sustain performance improvements. From an issue standpoint, on DWPF, did experience some issues with the melter primary and backup off-gas systems, and items have now been corrected. Payment in lieu of taxes, if you remember, at the start of FY18 was a real concern for the community. Obviously, we heard, and at every opportunity that we had with the appropriators and congressional staff and members of Congress, we stressed the importance of funding PILT. We were able to get that in 2018, and we did the same for 19. I'm happy to say that PILT is covered in the 19 budget. And the last issue was on the H Canyon exhaust duct. We continue to analyze the things there with the exhaust tunnel for H Canyon, and we have some initial results from the ongoing studies expected by the end of 2018 calendar year. And that's the end of my update.
All right, folks, do we have any questions? Other than Narinder? No? Okay, let's start with Narinder.
Narendra Malik, thank you for the presentation, enjoyed it. I have a couple of questions. One is about the salt stone. It says that 276,000 gallons have been poured. What was the target for FY18?
Jim, you wanna give-
Jim Folk, DOE Assistant Manager for Waste Disposition. Target was about 700,000 gallons. Again, it's a success story in the fact that we have pretty much processed all the feed we had available for Saltstone. So MCU operation has not been up to the expectations for the year. That's the generator of the feed that would supply Saltstone. So we're working through MCU, but Saltstone has been performing very well. Thanks.
I have another question about, I think in last couple of months ago, we heard that the pot for 3H evaporator may be replaced. What is the status on that?
Yeah, Jim Folk again. The 3H evaporator has been up and running, as Thomas mentioned. So we came back up in July. Very effective operation since then. The leakage rate that we had anticipated is less than had been forecast. So again, that's a good story. But in the meantime, we are proceeding with procurement of a spare pot in the event that we do decide at some point in time it's appropriate to change that out or if performance degrades. So they've just, they procured all the material for that and have initiated the construction of a spare pot.
If, pardon me, if the current pot has to be replaced, what is the path forward for disposition of this current pot? Is it going to be at the site or is it going to be sent outside for disposal?
I believe the ones that we've had to replace in the past, I think the 2F evaporator may be one you're thinking of. When they replaced that in the past, they ended up burying that on site. Again, the part of the process will be that you go through, you make sure that you flush it out. Fortunately, it's a piece of equipment that can be cleaned pretty well, so it'll be flushed out, cleaned to the extent we can, and then we'll measure it up against what we're allowed to bury on site, and if all that matches up, we can bury it in E area.
Will it be buried empty or you can fill it up with some grout?
That would be determined. Most likely, what they end up doing is getting a large box, very simply a large box, so that would prevent any kind of subsidence if that's what you're thinking about. So it would be inside that box and disposed that way.
Thank you.
Mine, you're going to get a full detailed 3H evaporator presentation tomorrow too. Dan?
Dan Kaminsky Cab. Thank you for the update. I just have several questions, so cut me off if you need to facilitate anyone else in here. So just with regards to the asphalt millings, was there an associated cost savings to that?
Go ahead.
I presume there is.
So this is Mike McElhaney, DOE, although I'm not the current assistant manager for that, I can explain what was done when I was the assistant manager. Normally, you can sell back the millings for some reduction when you work out the contract. For the work on site, the contractor we brought in did not want to reuse or recycle those, so no, we didn't get a savings or reduced price for giving back the tailings to them. We used them on site instead to, as Thomas indicated, to strengthen the roads that would otherwise are clay or grass that we would drive on for some of the backwoods to add a range into one of the landfills.
So just repurposed in that case?
Just repurposed
Okay,
it
great.
instead of, we got a return on the value instead of from the contractor by being able to repurpose it on site for improved transportation.
Still a good use.
And Dan, I believe we also worked some with the community reuse organization where they also took some of the millings for reuse as well.
No, good to know. It's always good to hear either reusing or cost savings. Actually, it's still a cost savings because you're still going to be maintaining those roads at some point, and now you've already got a good head start. On the liquid waste program, we did 24, I'm sorry, not liquid waste, on the PU down blend, we had 24 cans in 2018 so far. To attain the 1 ton reduction, how many more cans do we have to go?
Yeah, go ahead.
Unfortunately, that's not a question I'll be able to answer. Once you start talking about plutonium, all I can really tell you is that our NSA customer is very pleased with the support that we've given them. But I really can't provide any details on how much or where we are in that campaign.
And the other thing, Dan, 24 cans is what was scheduled for 2018, and we actually only downplayed to 10 for the year.
And then on the canister inspections, the annual teardowns and inspections of the storage canisters, were any issues discovered? I know in years past, these have all come back. The results have been excellent and very little degradation.
No, there were no issues noted with the destructive examinations of the cans.
Okay. Regarding the saltstone facility, processing basically 250,000 gallons of salt solution, did this hold pace with what needed to be introduced into the tanks? Have we made a net progress of what's in the storage tanks?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we've essentially depleted the supply of feed for Saltstone now. So matter of fact, we're supposed to be running today as well. So we have a couple days left of feed, and then we'll be down waiting on MCU to catch up.
Okay, but with regards to overall inventory in the liquid waste tanks, have we made progress, held our own, or did we lose ground?
Yeah, we're holding our own. We have about 35 million gallons of total waste across the system, and so that number is staying pretty much flat now for the last several years.
All right. Thanks, that's all I had.
Bobby?
Bobby Williams, CAP. Under the liquid waste acquisition, you said you're almost ready to make an announcement. Is that going to be this month, next month, or?
Well, I wish I could give you a date certain. I mean, we have done, at the site level, we've done what I believe to be everything that we can, and it's just going through the review process at headquarters level. Now, that doesn't mean that there's an announcement tomorrow. There can be exchanges with headquarters multiple times before we actually move to an announcement. We'd like to get that contract awarded, probably more so than each of you in this room.
Okay. Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, CAB. With regard to the glass waste double stacking, you said that 287 positions have been modified for a total of 782. Is that counting the 500 that are already filled?
Now, that's counting the 500 that's already been filled, so 782 modified, and we've filled 500 of those to date.
So with 782 total, what happened to 5?
What happened to 5?
Because 500 and 287 should be 787.
Let me help with that. Jim Folk, no, that's okay.
No, yes.
Yeah, remember, each position, when we talk about a modified position, can hold 2 canisters. So when we modify the position, we described that in here once before where we go in, we remove the support plate on the bottom so we can make the space. We get a new plug that we can use. So what we're saying here, 782 of those total positions have been modified. 500 cans have actually been double stacked. So we've used 250 of those positions, right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay,
I'm
so
got it
that's,
now.
and what we're doing, right, and what we have to do is we move ahead when we have the opportunity to make more positions, so it'll just be a constant, that would represent about 1/3 of the facility roughly has been prepared for double stack.
Okay. Charles?
Charles Hilton, CAB. I think Dan's question touched on this. Jim, you said that we were at 35 million gallons in the tanks and it was flat. The DWPF is down, the MCU is down. Saltstone processed approximately 40% of what we had anticipated. when do we anticipate these facilities back up and actually processing waste?
Yeah, that's a real good question. It's one that keeps me going most of the time. If you flash back to, at some point in time, you've probably seen a presentation that we have done on the liquid waste program that reflects a series of gears, right, for each of the different facilities that are going around. Today, if you went through each of those gears, what you would find is they are all operable with the exception of one, and that is my MCU unit has been down, which is my salt processing unit, has been down now for about a month, maybe a little more. We've been experiencing some blockage within that system. So it's keeping us from processing salt, which again, supplies feed over to DWPF. The cleaned up material sends feed over for saltstone. So that is my hub right now. The rest of the system is up and operable. We're really focused in on getting MCU cleaned up. So going through a pretty rigorous program now of trying to identify what that blockage is and what the cause of that is. So we're kind of going down through that with two different avenues. One is with the lab, who's reviewing the material we found in there to see what the nature of that is. And then the second part is we're going through, just like your mother or grandmother would do, cleaning everything out, right? So we're cleaning everything, rinsing, and hopefully within about 2 weeks is the forecast restart date for MCU. So once MCU gets up and cooking, I ought to have the rest of my system up and purring along.
The piping network, do you pig it? Is that the process, or is it chemical clean?
It's a variety. Some is just high velocity flush. So, you know, some of the parts of the system are fairly low volume, so we're increasing some flush material through there, just water. We're also using some nitric acid to help dissolve any material that might be in there. So it's a variety of approaches to try to clean the entire system out, and that's what we're doing now.
So when that comes back up, since DWPF is down for steam and routine maintenance, that'll be a quick fix. And
yeah, it's just an opportunity. So if everything else were up and running, I'd have MCU up, and I'd have DWPF up and running as well. But since, again, that gear is down, we're taking advantage of the time to do maintenance in different facilities.
which makes sense. Thank you.
And Susan?
Susan Corbett, Cab. Can you remind us again why the MCU is in an outage? I can't remember.
Well, as of now, MCU is in an outage because of that blockage. You know, again, you recall we came up through a large system-wide outage toward the end of last year and really didn't get out of that entirely until about the first quarter of this year. MCU did run for a little while, but what we noticed was an increasing rate of this blockage that was in there, and now it got to the point where we just have to go through and thoroughly clean the system out. And again, I think a lot of it's speculation, but it's likely due to the fact that we were down for 12 months or so in the rest of the system, and you know, some speculation, we have some biological growth or something like that in there that's blocking some of the
That's what I was
filters.
going to ask. What is the nature of the blockage?
Well, there've been a couple different theories. Right now, the thought is that there's a biological type growth that is clogging a filter. And without getting too detailed, because I like to keep it simple, if you kind of think of this, they call it coalescer, kind of looks like a roll of paper towels, okay? And so it looks like there's blockage that's accumulating in there and shutting down the system.
It's a giant genetically modified bacteria that's growing in there.
Well, it could be. So anyway, but that's why we have the national lab, and they're off reviewing that material and see if it is that cause, and if it is, then how do we treat it?
Would you just flush it with something, or would you something?
Well, that's what we're doing now. It's a flush and acid and the like to clean out the system.
So you have to actually kill it, you think, before
Well,
you?
again,
you know,
I won't
you know,
speculate
yeah.
until we figure out exactly what it is.
Okay.
But that's what we're doing. We're just trying to do everything we can to flush the system and get back up
Have
in
y'all
operation.
ever experienced anything like this before?
Not while I've been there. I've been there
Interesting.
about 8 years or so. So,
Okay.
so anyway, it's
Thank
a
you.
challenge for us. Thank you.
Interesting.
All right. Yes, sir.
Hey, James, I just want to go back to Ms. Bobby for a second. On the liquid waste contract, I didn't mean to imply if folks got that the headquarters is holding us up. We're having active discussions. Remember, this was protested the last cycle through, so There's a lot of going back and checking this again, checking it a third time, and having those kinds of discussions to make sure that we've got everything covered. With the hopes being that we can actually get to an award, and hopefully one that will not be protested this time, or at least one that we can survive a protest if that were to happen.
All right, any other questions for Thomas? Going once, going twice? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
John, I know we're going to get a fuller update from you tomorrow on oversight activities, but do you mind giving a brief update on EPA right now?
Yes, John Richards, EPA, Region 4. Yeah, I'll be talking more tomorrow, but as many of you know, I'm acting FFA manager for EPA Region 4 for Savannah River, and Rob Pope should be taking back over the reins October 1st, but it might be a little transition. But anyway, I'll just continue more with my project manager duties with the tanks and some other parts of the site. Yeah, I'll have more tomorrow, and I think other than that, because I think everything else I'll be saying, again, we're very, happy with the current progress, as you mentioned earlier, the P and the D and areas, and especially moving up some of the D area projects as a result of some of the delays in the tanks that was negotiated last year. That's was very, very well received from our Superfund Division Director, Region 4. So I think that's all I have for now.
Questions for EPA? Dan? Oh, Susan? We'll start with Susan.
Susan Corbett, CAB. So considering what's going on in North Carolina, which is just devastating, I'm wondering if Florence had settled. I mean, I was up in Virginia when this was all watching, and I was watching it head right straight from my house in Columbia. And also for this area, I was, thinking about what it would be like if we had that massive rainfall here. Were there any concerns that you all had that you prepared for here? And if they dumped 10 or 15 feet of water on Savannah Riverside, are there areas of coal ash that would flood, or other areas where it would be a problem with that much water being on the ground?
Yeah, I failed to mention, just like with Irma last year, and especially with the focus as a result of the Houston Hurricane Hector, I think EPA had to do a much better job of making sure all of our Superfund sites, websites were updated. And not only that, we learned with Irma last year, even though it was mostly Florida, but Florida, North Georgia, South Carolina, to visibly go to each and every Superfund site to make sure of any damage or things. And so similar what's happening now. In fact, this week, last week, project managers such as myself, on-scene coordinators are going down all the sites, especially North Carolina, South Carolina, even Georgia. Now, federal facility is a little bit different. Camp Lejeune is maybe our biggest federal facility that's been inundated with a flood. But again, they're so large in the federal facility themselves, being the lead agency, they do their own assessment, but they are constantly in contact with us. I know even with Savannah River, that, as he mentioned, didn't have hardly any damage, we had constant contact with Brian Hennessy, my counterpart, because again, every single site in those 3 states we had to give a report on, and even though we knew Savannah River in this case didn't have much impact, we still had Brian send us pictures and gave us a full assessment to brief our management on. So if worst case scenario happened, or something happened like at Camp Lejeune, they're still assessing all the damage at Savannah River. We're obviously very confident that they're able to do their job, and we would be able to assist them if they requested it, like we would for any facility. So.
All right. Dan?
John, thank you. I realize you're having a big presentation tomorrow, and I don't want to steal any thunder from that, but just wondering if it's going to include, or if you could clue us in as to what EPA's view of the greatest success at the site has been for this year.
Oh, I may have to think of that overnight in my presentation.
Take as much time as you like, but you have 24 hours.
Yeah, I may wait to do that. But yeah, again, for us, one of the big pluses, we've had a lot of disputes in some of our other DOE sites in my region that I work on as well as project manager and radiation support. So that's one reason I mentioned earlier, when we reach sometimes an impasse and when I know South Carolina and ourselves are frustrated with salt waste process facility being delayed, kind of causing everything else to be delayed. Jim and his people have been very upfront to meet with us on a regular basis, calls and site visits, even touring Ticker this year. But when those are delayed, what do we get in return? And getting other projects, at least in the circle world, was a major plus, as I mentioned earlier, for our Superfund division director. And I know he put that in his report. He asked the SR2 headquarters as a major plus when it comes to working with DOE, that hopefully other DOE sites will learn from, that we can, we sometimes we're not going to always agree, but sometimes we get other work done while we're waiting for other things to happen. So, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for EPA? All right. Shelley?
Good afternoon. Welcome to Columbia. I'm Shelley Wilson with South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. So it's good to see you all here today, safe and sound. So at DHEC, we are, of course, very saddened at the impact of Florence on our state and elsewhere. And having said that, we are extremely proud to be a part of Team South Carolina, preparing for Florence and responding to Florence. So we've been working with the governor and the South Carolina Emergency Management Division. Really, for most of September, we've been working around the clock, 24 hours, 7 days a week, to prepare and also respond to the huge impacts from Florence. So just to give you some idea of that scope of response, we've had more than 700 of our DHEC people that we've dispatched throughout the state as part of those emergency response efforts. Our call centers have fielded more than 5,800 calls from the public about special medical needs, health services, things like private well testing, that sort of thing. We're working with the Department of Natural Resources to monitor flooding. That's still a major factor around the state. And I'm looking at healthcare facilities in those areas, and if any special needs arise there, looking at drinking water supply, and if there are any issues there. And that is, it's still ongoing, and it may, the floodwaters may take, they may take, even most of the rest of this month to subside completely. So we're still actively working hard in those areas. We have one special medical needs shelter that's still open, helping people not sick enough to go to a hospital, but if they're evacuated, they still have some special medical needs. We're actually waiving the fee for private wells to get their bacteriological testing for those wells that have been impacted in the flood areas. So, and on and on. So, looking at dams more closely, I could give you a long list, but we're working hard. Really, again, started that first week of September, and to the present day, working hard to be responsive and help with emergency needs in the state. So, as Doug mentioned, I saw him a week before last up in Washington, D.C., Doug and Gil at the joint meeting of the Site-Specific Advisory Boards and the EMAB. And I saw them there because I actually serve on the Environmental Management Advisory Board. About a year or so ago, I was appointed by the DOE secretary to serve. It's a board very much like this, giving advice to the assistant secretary for environmental management, and we sometimes make recommendations, just like you all do. It's a diverse group. There's some academic people and some consultants. I'm the only regulator on the board. There are 2 past regulators, but it's former DOE people, and again, just a wide array of viewpoints. And just thought I would mention to you that we actually passed our first recommendation at this last meeting, and just because again, it might be of interest. I actually wrote the recommendation as the head of the subcommittee, and it, you heard John talk about some success that we've had because of the partnering efforts that we have at Savannah River Site. The recommendation was actually a suggestion to to partner a pilot project at Hanford in Washington State, very similar to what we do, partnering, which has been such a strong success with DOE, DHEC, and EPA here at Savannah River Site. So it's kind of good to know that there's a strong success right here in South Carolina, that the idea is to export to another part of the country. So that's one recent, really the EMAB recommendation that was passed up in DC week before last. So also wanted to touch a little bit on the budget. And so I'll start with the bad news first, because people like to hear that first generally. And the bad news is that for 2019, Savannah River Site did not get everything that the president's budget asked for. And you've heard that previously. Put that in the context of most of the other sites got more than what the president's budget asked for. So I'll just leave that thought with you there. Savannah River got less than the president's budget request. That's the bad news. The good news, okay, there is some silver lining there, I think, because the FY19 budget looks like it's going to be more than the FY18 budget was. So if you look at these past 2 years, it's up. And part of that, again, just my thought here is it's because DOE and Savannah River put forward such a strong budget request for FY19 for Savannah River Site. And this budget request was the strongest budget for Savannah River that I've seen in at least 5 or 6 years. So the previous years were kind of meager for Savannah River. FY19 was a good, healthy budget request from DOE. So we are we're very thankful that DOE really requested that hearty budget. Again, we didn't get it all, but I think that because they requested it so strong, that the budget that we got, again, it's still higher than last year. So that's in my mind a somewhat positive trend. And to me, it amplifies the need for next year's budget request to again be a strong or stronger healthy budget request, because what we want to see is a trend upward for Savannah River Site, especially given the pension issue that's looming on the horizon, looming and here, essentially, especially given pension, and especially given the fact that we're hoping to ramp up with high-level waste activities, getting the salt waste processing facility online to really work down that legacy high-level waste volume. So speaking of high-level waste, you're going to hear from Pam Marks about the salt waste processing facility. And again, that's, I think you all know, the large-scale workhorse facility that, getting to your point earlier, is really, it's going to help us, instead of just treading water, really work down that legacy volume of high-level waste in the tanks. And I just wanted to let you know that you'll probably hear a lot about schedule, and there are lots of different schedules, the DOE schedule and the contractor schedule, and but there's also a regulatory schedule, and we have a dispute resolution agreement that it says that facility is required to start up by the last calendar day of this year. Okay, so just that's pretty soon. You probably have a good idea that that the SWPF won't start up by then, because you've probably heard it's extended out. But again, just to let you know, that regulatory schedule is the very end of this calendar year, and so that we expect we'll have some discussions with DOE about that schedule and any need for extension. Okay. So I'm also going to do with John a presentation tomorrow on DHEC oversight for Savannah River. Just wanted to give you a little commercial advertisement, a teaser. I'm going to have Michael Bailey with me. Michael is with DHEC. Michael Bailey is involved in our community engagement and environmental justice areas, and so he'll be with me tomorrow for part of that presentation. And lastly, I just wanted to let Grace Ann Martin make an announcement about some data availability that we have.
Hi, Grace Ann Martin from DHEC. As I guess the past 2 meetings, I had put out some of our hard copies of the 2016 data report for our ESOP program in our Aiken office. So if you all would like one of those copies, they are available on the public handout desk. Thank you.
Questions for DHEC? Dan?
I took my question pill this morning. Just curious, heard on the radio driving over to Columbia today about the waste pond flooding, particularly in North Carolina. A lot of agricultural waste ponds from chickens and pork. So obviously when we get flooding and it breaches those ponds and sweeps all the waste away, kind of relating that back to SRS, from DX's point of view, do we have any such risks of, had that hurricane hit home here and flooded the area, do we have waste ponds at SRS that would be overtaken by floodwaters and washed away?
So sounds like you're targeting just for Savannah Riverside.
Yes, sorry.
Right. And, you know, and I'll probably need some help with this question, okay? But I you know, if you looked back in the 70s or 80s, I would say definitely yes. But back in that time period, we worked really hard to close a lot of the open ponds in F area, H area, and then a lot of the burial grounds, like at the old burial ground complex, mixed waste management facility, a lot of those areas that were big sources, we worked hard to close back in that time period. And of course, the recent work that's been done on the coal ash areas at Savannah River site. So I'm thinking a lot of those legacy bigger risk sources we have already addressed. And there's nothing coming to mind that would be, you know, there are lots of groundwater plumes, but they're under, you know, not open
I'm
to the
hoping
elements.
I was getting this answer. It was just just one of those topics that, you know, as we think about things that have happened, lesson learned, so to speak, in North Carolina, seeing these terrible things get washed down into the floodwaters, certainly appreciate that we have taken those steps in the past. And go ahead, Michael.
Mike Michelin, Stevie, there are 2 bodies of water that we pay a lot of attention to. One is L Lake, and the other is Parr Pond, with B connected to it as well. Both of those bodies of water have dams with it, and in preparation for any serious weather like this, with the hurricane in particular, our emergency response organization coordinates very closely with the state, and we start taking precautions, you know, days ahead of any landfall of a storm like that. So we start lowering the levels in the lakes in anticipation of a lot of rainfall. So yes, we have those 2 bodies of water, and we pay a lot of attention to it in preparing for bad weather such as a hurricane.
And thank you so much for the help, the call a friend, the lifeline. But notice he said a body of water, which is, it can be a hazard. But again, we do have a control that we report to EPA about human exposures, and by and large for Savannah River site, those sort of immediate risks for human exposures have been controlled.
Great, thank you.
Narendra? That's your card, isn't it?
Narendra Malik. May I add to that? Yeah, we do have a lot of ponds at SRS, and I'd like to add to that, they have been all permitted by DHEC. They have been tested with 100-year rain event, so it's my belief that they will never overflow.
Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, cab. Is it on? Okay, anyway, sorry. So we're talking about water and overflowing and flooding. And obviously with hurricanes, the issue in North Carolina is that the Cape Fear River is overflowing. And in Katrina, the Mississippi River overflowed. And obviously, we are the Savannah River site. Was it strategically, like, is there something special about Savannah River that I don't know that makes that less of a concern, maybe? Like, was it picked back in the day because maybe it won't overflow?
I don't know about that historical decision, but all rivers have the potential. You know, if there's enough water going in and a natural disaster, you know, flooding can be a concern really, and I would say most.
And also, I'd like to add, you know, for most of the facilities at Savannah River, facility areas are really in the interior portion of the site, so they're a pretty significant distance away from the river itself.
And Susan?
Susan Corbett, cab. I thank you for asking your question, Dan. I mean, I think that unfortunately we cannot be satisfied with 100-year flood levels anymore. Those of us who live in Columbia here, 2-3 years ago, experienced a 500-year flood. This whole city was devastated, underwater. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere. I barely made it back across the river into West Columbia when I tried to get home. So I'm hoping that the studies have been done at SRS, because we all know the climate is changing, and warmer climate holds more moisture, and that's what's happening here, and these catastrophic rain events are going to continue to increase. So we better be looking and studying the effects of a 500-year flood, not just a 100-year flood. And I echo Dan's concerns about big floods that overflow Lake and Power Pond and all the other small bodies of water, and then flood the whole place. I mean, I think that's something, I hope there is some kind of a study of that we can think about, because I think it's inevitable with this warming climate that it's going to happen.
And Don?
Dawn Gillis, cab. Are there any other ash piles on the Savannah River site besides the ash that's being taken care of?
Are there any outstanding?
So, Mike Michelanis, DOE, there are a number of ash piles that still have yet to be remediated. D-ash was the largest of those ash piles and the closest to the Savannah River. The others are pretty much every operating area had a coal power plant at one time to produce steam for the processing operations. And I'd have to go back and look at my notes in my old job. A couple of those we had already cleaned out, working with the South Carolina National Guard, for example, but there are a number of others that are all inside the FFA for remediation in the future.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because watching the impacts of Florence in North Carolina and seeing some of the big power plants, and that their coal ash piles were being washed into the river, and they were worried about mercury and all kinds of stuff that's coming out of that. So I'm assuming that these are smaller ones here, longer term, but smaller ones.
Mike McLean, Stevie. Yes, the Savannah River main coal plant ash pile and coal pile were much smaller than a commercial production facility. And over the last several years, we're now approaching the very final phases of the remediation project as it is. So even had we gotten a lot of water, all of the ash had already been consolidated and put under cover.
Thank you.
Charles?
Charles Hilton, cab. Shelley, back to your comment that from a regulatory standpoint, that Saltstone had to be up by the end of the year. Having worked in a highly regulated industry by DHEC for 40 years, you mentioned that if it doesn't happen, then we're going to negotiate. If we have a deadline, we need to have things happening. So what did you mean by are we talking about fines, or are we talking, extending the process? What are we talking about?
Sure, and as part of our dispute resolution agreement, there are some stipulated penalties as part of that agreement. So when I say negotiate, it's that again, we haven't received a request from Savannah Riverside yet, but I'm guessing that when they come and ask us for that extension, they'll probably cite some pretty good reasons. And you know, some of the reasons, you know, may very well be legitimate. And so we'll have to look at kind of the strength and the justification behind those reasons, and how much at that time, you know, if there's any good justification for an extension. You know, it doesn't do us any good to spend time in court going after money from taxpayers if there really was a good reason to extend that deadline. And so, again, I haven't seen their request, but I'll be honest, I'm thinking they've probably got some fairly good justification behind some of the, you know, some of that time. We'll be looking closely to see how much of an extension request they ask and how much time we think is justified, you know, based on those reasons. And looking very closely at exactly, you know, how much we think would be appropriate. So, and frankly, whenever we negotiate a schedule like that, when we think that there is an appropriate reason for an extension, we usually look at getting some other gain. So just like John mentioned, if you change something in a schedule, we're looking for something else that's also a win. So it's all of those factors that go in together when I'm talking about kind of a discussion or negotiation for that new date. And you'll hear from Pam today. You'll kind of hear where they are in schedule and what factors are playing into it. So it'll give you some sort of feel also for you know, the things that are pretty good reasons, perhaps in kind of the collective judgment.
And Charles, I think we also enjoy a good working relationship with DHEC because we are open and honest with them, and generally they will know well ahead of time whether we're going to not make a date or not. We'll have those discussions with them so that, you know, we do act, even though they're our regulators, we do act like we're partners so that they know where we are at all times. Because at the end of the day, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to pay out funds as fines when we could actually get some work done from that. Because at times, the reason for the delay isn't lack of funds. There may actually be a technical reason why something is being delayed slightly.
Okay. Any other questions, especially for DHEC or anybody else we've heard from today? No? Okay, we have a scheduled break right now. Do you guys want to take it now, or do you want to plow through the committee updates? Break? Everybody says break. All right, so come back in 15 minutes, please. All right, we're just about settled in. So next, let's move into the committee updates for the day, and let's start with A&O. Eleanor?
Good afternoon. I'm Eleanor Hobson, Administrative and Outreach Committee Chair. Welcome to Columbia, South Carolina. For outreach, we would like for CAB members to start thinking about chairing a committee in 2019. You have done a splendid job, and many of you are already vice chairs and would make great chairs of committees. We are looking forward to 2019 and having a great experience. We are also seeking new members for the CAB, as always. We will take your applications and we will highly consider those who would like to be CAB members. The committee will meet this afternoon after the full board meeting in the Calhoun room, and the Calhoun room is next door. And that is all. Thank you.
Any questions for Eleanor and A&O? All right. Joyce, would you update everybody on FDSR?
Hello, dear friends and gentle CAB members, and welcome to beautiful Columbia, South Carolina for our meeting. We have two big announcements for our Facilities Dispensation and Site Remediation Committee, and they're both recommendations, and we'll be talking about them later today and voting on them tomorrow. And that's about it. Our next meeting is somewhere on that board, maybe. October.
17th, I think it is.
Is it?
It's
or is
well
it December
before then.
11th?
I promise you that there's one in October.
We have one in October at some point. Please come. We love you all. And that's about all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Larry, give us an update on nuclear materials.
Thank you. I'm Larry Powell, Chair of the Nuclear Materials Committee. I don't have a lot to report either. We do have one pending recommendation, number 358, which is the exchange with Idaho for the aluminum-clad spent fuel with the stainless steel-clad fuel, and we don't have an answer on that yet. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Great, Larry. Any questions for nuclear materials? Or FDSR, because I skipped that part. We can go back to Joyce, too. No? All right. Dan?
Good afternoon, everyone. Dan Kaminsky. I'm the chairman of the Strategic and Legacy Management Committee. We have one open recommendation, number 355, the budget, pension, and scope. None pending, and we have none in draft at this time. We do have a couple of presentations tomorrow. We have a Savannah River National Lab update and funding, and we also have the Community Reuse Organization. So hopefully we'll get some draft recommendations going out of those. And I believe they also had our December dates on the slides.
October.
Yep. Oh, we got October there. So October 17th.
There you go.
Please come join us. Usually a fun evening. Right, James?
It is. It's always great.
It's always great. With that, that's all we have.
All right. Any questions for Dan in Strategic and Legacy Management? Oh. Dawn, you ready to go over waste management? Yeah, that fast.
Wow.
You came back just in the nick of time.
I haven't even gotten sugar in my coffee yet. Dawn Gillis, CAB Waste Management Chair. I want to apologize to the committee for not being at the last committee meeting, and I'm sure Norinda did a great job running it. Oh, you weren't there either, were you? You were at the last committee meeting. Yeah. So, okay, so we have 3 open ones, no pending. And I guess we're going to go over, we've got response to,
56 and 357, those will be the ones that we go over at your next committee meeting.
at the next
in
committee
October.
meeting, because we have responses to them, but we haven't discussed them yet. Okay,
Right.
that's right. Okay, gotta keep me straight, James, thank you.
I just happen to remember.
You know all of them. Okay, then, next slide, okay, so we have a presentation tomorrow about the 3H evaporator. And that's our schedule for the remaining couple of months we have, and our next meeting is October 16th. So please come to the meeting. I will not be at that one either. Sorry. Miranda, you've got that one.
Any questions for Dawn while we have her? No? All right. So, great. Let's move into SWPF and Pam Marks.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
It's great to be back with y'all. It's been a little while since I've seen you. First of all, I would like to express my apologies to the board for not being present at the last committee meeting, but I think you all know I was in D.C. talking to our House and Senate committees, and I'm proud to say that those efforts have paid off. My understanding is the President did sign a bill yesterday, and we have reinstated our full funding for SWPF. So appreciate your consideration, and I think I was in the right place at the right time. So it's all really good news for SWPF. Secondly, thank you for your consideration for allowing me to come today instead of tomorrow. I am having surgery tomorrow, but it was very important to me to personally be here with you and update you on salt waste. So again, thank you for your consideration in modifying the agenda on my behalf. So today I'm going to give an update on SWPF. This will be a little bit of a history lesson for some of you that have been here before, but I know we also have some new members. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the mission and purpose of salt waste and then go into our status. James.
The middle one is the forward.
Okay. And where's the backward? Okay. All right, so let's talk about the salt waste processing facility. Again, as many of you know, we are a key component of the liquid waste program. We are going to be the big machine that processes liquid waste when we get to the startup phase. And our mission is to reduce the radioactive volumes in the liquid waste program that require vitrification. We are fortunately using the same technology that's currently being used by the liquid waste program, which we call the actinide removal project, modular caustic side solvent extraction, better known as ARP-MCU. That rolls off the tongue a little bit faster. But we are using those same technologies, which gives us a high level of technical confidence that at the time of SWP startup, we should be able to easily process those wastes. We will process over 90% of the inventory that's currently in the tank farms, which roughly ends up being about 100 million gallons after dilution to accommodate our process. And we have a nominal capacity of 6 to 8 million gallons a year. That's our design basis. I'm going to talk to you toward the end of this presentation about some innovations that we're trying to accelerate that will actually hopefully increase that capacity. This is just the liquid waste flow sheet, and you can see how we fit into that. As you guys know, the materials come from the canyons. They come into salt waste. Right now they go through ARP-MCU, but eventually it's through salt waste. The radionuclide materials will go back to DWPF for vitrification. The decontaminated salt solution goes to the salt disposal facility, which I think you've recently heard from Shane Farrell and the progress we're making on constructing the SDUs. And then, of course, the materials from DWPF go to the glass waste storage building. We expect to get a decontamination factor of greater than 40,000, and again, with some of the innovations I'm going to tell you about, actually expect to significantly exceed that, which means there are less curies left in the state of South Carolina, which I know that's what everybody gets very excited about. As I already mentioned, our technology is very mature since we're adopting what's already being demonstrated at Liquid Waste. And we're also very proud to say we don't have any open issues with our regulator, the Defense Safety Nuclear Board. So really good news for the salt waste project. This is our flow sheet. Again, we start with the material coming from the tank farms. We have 3 unit operations. The first one we call the Alpha Strike, and that's where we remove the strontium and actinides from the waste streams and send those back to DWPF for vitrification. We then move into the cesium removal process. For those of you who've been through our facilities, that's the contactor banks that you see on the second floor. And those materials, that's where we, again, remove the cesium, go to DWPF. We have a 3rd unit operation, which we call alpha finishing process. And we really don't expect to use that probably toward the end of our life cycle if we're lucky. What that is if these first steps don't meet our waste acceptance criteria for materials going back to DWPF or salt disposal, we can send them back through and it's like a polishing step. We can strike the material again, try to get those decontamination factors down, but again, at this point in time, we don't anticipate needing to use that unit operation. And then as I previously mentioned, the decontaminated waste solution goes to the salt waste facility, or saltstone facility, sorry. This is just a few statistics that many of you seen before. Talks about the facility itself under the construction phase. As you may recall, we did finish construction in May of 2016. We were well ahead of schedule and under budget, but this just gives you a sense of the complexity of the facility in terms of square footage, a lot of concrete, of course a lot of piping, a lot of welding, a lot of electrical and rebar. And that is an artist's rendition of what the facility looks like. And it actually turned out to look a lot like that, surprisingly. Currently, we have about 460 people working on the project under Parsons, who's the salt waste contractor. You can see the breakdown here. Of course, this breakdown, this breakdown of people was significantly different under the construction phase. Obviously, we've increased our testing staff. The biggest increase has been in operations and maintenance because that's now the focus of our initiatives to get the facility operating. We still have some construction craft on board under Davis-Bacon. They do some of our facility work. And then in addition to that, there are about 50 people that are working on some facility modifications that are going to allow us to incorporate the next generation solvent into our process flow sheet once we become operational. And right now, we don't foresee this staffing level changing significantly. Obviously, the 50 people on next generation solvent will move off once that becomes finished at the end of this year. Some of these craft people are actually going to transition to maintenance also at the end of this year. But total count should stay pretty consistent for the next couple of years. So let's talk about where we are in testing and commissioning. This is the approach we take to commissioning our facility. We have a series of management assessments and operational readiness review that the facility and the team have to go through. The first one of those was management self-assessment 1, and that happened when we came out of construction and transitioned into the testing mode. Obviously, the mentality of the facility changes. We go from a construction mentality to more of an operating mentality. And we ensured that several, I don't like this clicker, James. Several of our safety management programs needed to be in place to start, to allow us to begin testing with water. We are currently on the cusp of management self-assessment 2. It actually started earlier this month. And that management self-assessment is for the introduction of chemicals, which is our next major evolution in the facility. We've completed our testing with water, and now the next big step is we introduce chemicals. We also introduce a chemical simulant that simulates the waste that we'll receive from DWPF. And we will go through a rigorous testing program using those simulated chemicals. So management self-assessment 2 is intended to make sure that we have all our chemical safety and industrial hygiene programs in place, our final fire protection posture, some incremental training and qualification of our personnel to ensure that they can manage and handle those chemicals. Obviously, we'll be generating some different wastes, chemical wastes that need to be disposed of, and then making sure we have all the procedures and programs in place for what we call performance testing. After we go through that chemical testing phase, then we do a management self-assessment 3, which ensures us that we're ready for that operational readiness review. And that brings in the last few safety management programs, make sure we have a fully compliant emergency management program, that our safety basis is implemented, and that our radiation protection program is implemented. After MSA 3, then we go through a contractor operational readiness review, and then followed up by a Department of Energy operational readiness review. So you can see from this flow diagram, hopefully, that we do go through a very rigorous set of reviews and tests, if you want to think about it that way, to ensure that we can operate safely and efficiently when it comes time to operate. All right. Oops. Think on it. So this is where we are in that process right now. As I mentioned, we have already completed all of our water testing right after construction. If you recall, when I briefed you on our construction complete, we had a number of 72 systems that we actually physically turned over from construction to testing. We made sure that all the construction was complete, that all the design requirements had been met, and that the systems actually were ready to go into testing. Right after we finished that turnover, we did what we call the calibration, grooming, and alignment process, which basically means the individual components, we made sure that they were tuned and groomed to go into water testing. Then we went through a series of 60 system operational tests with water, and then after those 60, we took those 60 and integrated them into 5 integrated system tests. All of that's with water. We completed that around the middle of June of this year. And the good news is all the systems have been working really well. We haven't had any major redesign efforts. We've had what I call some of the nuisance things, like some of the pumps didn't quite pump the way we wanted. We did have to change out a few, but nothing major. We're not repping out major systems or subsystems. Subsequent to the water testing, then we're going to do what we call integrated water runs. That is the transition from water to chemicals. We basically then run the entire plant. First time we run it with water just to make sure everything truly is integrated, everything is truly operating the way it needs to, and that we have the appropriate handoff between different procedures to run the plant. Then we move into what we call cold commissioning. That's when we actually introduce the chemicals and run with chemical simulants. And then, as I mentioned, we go through our operational readiness reviews. And then we actually, in the end, once we get our approval to operate, we actually go through what we call hot commissioning. And that is a short phase of the operation where we actually begin the introduction of the nuclear materials, and then we move ourselves into the operational phase. And there are test plans and procedures that go with all of these. So you notice that red line right there, and as I mentioned, we got through these 3 phases. Around the first of this calendar year, we identified an issue dealing with some of our automated valve controllers, and it has created some delays in the project. And what I'd like to do today is take time to walk you through what happened, why it happened, and what we're doing to fix it. So, like I said, back around the first of this calendar year, we had some process upsets. We'd had some issues going on in the plant that we were trying to troubleshoot. And what we noticed was, after looking at some of our logs and controller data, that we have a large number, it's over 700 automatic valves in the facility. And a population of those automatic valves were not operating as expected. And when I say not operating as expected, they were intermittently, I would say, making their own decisions. So a real simple example would be you're supposed to fail open, and they would just fail close. The controller said fail open, but the valve decided to fail close. So obviously, with the imminent introduction of chemicals, that created a great amount of concern to my contractor as well as the department, because obviously when you put these chemicals in the facility, you really would like to know where they're going, right? You don't want them to go on the floor, you don't want them to go in the environment, and you certainly don't want them going on a person, right? So we took a pause and we interrogated that problem, and we got in the valve controller vendor The valve controllers and valves are actually made by a company called Westlock. We also got in the programmer of our control system because we weren't sure which side of the line the problem was on. Was it on the valve side, or was it on the was it on the programming side on how the controller was talking to the valve? So we got both of those vendors in, and they looked very closely at the problem to give us some advice on to how to move forward. So just to explain what we're looking at here, this is a typical valve setup. You've got the actual valve here that obviously controls the flow of the material. You've got actuators, since these are automated valves, that actuate the valve operation. And then you've got the positioner. It's this piece here, this positioner, that has been the problem child. So a lot of people thought we were actually having to go in and replace all these valves. That's actually part of the good news, is we didn't have to go in and replace the valves, because if you did, there could be a lot of cutting and rewelding and stuff that would have to go with that. So from a good news perspective, it was just the positioner that needed to be replaced. To give you the big picture, as I mentioned, we have about 700 of these valves in the facility. They come in 3 models. We call them an FPAC. We have about 75 of those. Those have been doing fine. We haven't had any issues with the FPACs. We have an ICOT. There's about 150 of those. We had a few minor issues with some control boards early on. The vendor made some firmware. You guys are IT guys, you know what that means. Firmware upgrades to the controllers. And after that, those ICOTs have been working fine. All of the big problems we had were with the EPIC positioners, and as I mentioned, there's about 450 of those. To exacerbate this problem, when we were working with the vendor, they also informed us at the same time that they had made a business decision to no longer support the EPIC controller. So from a long-term perspective, yes, we could have gotten new EPICs in, we could have replaced them, maybe they'd have worked, maybe they wouldn't have, but the vendor was really unwilling to make any upgrades or changes to this EPIC controller because it was no longer going to be in their product line. So we worked with the vendor, and our solution was all of these 450 EPIC positioners are being replaced with either FPACs or ICOTs, depending on the use. So now we have new positioners, and we also have products that the vendor anticipates supporting for the long term. After we did the technical analysis, the vendors came in, gave us their recommendation. We got a letter from our contractor. They gave us 3 options to consider. One was we could do what we call a phased partial replacement approach, where we could basically go in and replace the controllers that only dealt with the chemical constituents, and then replace the remaining on a opportunistic basis. The second one was just go in, replace all the EPICs, and get it done before we go into chemical operations. And the third one was wait till they fail and then deal with it at that point in time. So obviously, option 1 or 2 were the only ones you wanted to consider. Option 1 would have left us with some legacy delays that we really couldn't anticipate the impacts of. So in concert with our contractor, the department and Parsons mutually agreed to execute option 2, and that's where we are right now. We're in the process of replacing all of those controllers with either FPACs or ICOTs. So to make that happen, here's what we have to do. Obviously, we have to do some design changes. Engineering has to evaluate it. We've got to update design drawings, get procurement specs out. We had to procure all of the new items, the new controllers. There were some software changes that had to be made to allow us to communicate with these controllers, and then write the work instructions. For construction, actually installs the controller, and then maintenance does the testing and tuning prior to return to service. So both our maintenance and construction organizations have a role in this. So where are we today? All of the controllers have been received. We received them, I think they all came in by the end of July. We procured them in May, so it was about 2 months of a procurement cycle. We've not only received the ones we need, but we also received a large number of spares. I think we procured over 700 total. As of today, or even today, we're still at about 94% complete. We're down to 37 remaining controllers. 7 of those are on the transfer line between SWPF and DWPF, and Savannah River Remediation and Parsons are currently working out the coordination to make that happen, and I hope to see that done in the next few weeks. We have 2 that are on a chilled water system, and we have a planned outage coming up. We'll take care of those 2. And the remaining population are on the operating deck, and they actually require the crane. And so that's a little bit more intrusive. We got to get the crane, got to get up there. So these last 30-some are a lot slower than what happened before. But I'm hopeful that in at least the next month, if not sooner, this will be behind us. All of the controllers will be replaced. So then, from a bigger picture, obviously this is a significant impact to the project. It's going to cost more money. It's delaying the project. So we're in the process of discussing contract modifications with Parsons. They actually are supposed to deliver a proposal to us today, which we hope we'll receive. They have given us a preliminary baseline change proposal to give us what they believe the impacts will be, and I don't have a final date, and the department is not releasing a new date for SWPF, but just trust me to say that the impacts will be somewhat substantial. It's about a year of delay because of this. Obviously, we're closely watching the replacement of the controllers. So far, it's all good news. They are behaving as they expect. Once we get them all installed, we'll do a little bit more rigorous testing with water just to make sure the problems we had in the past don't repeat themselves. But so far, all that news is really good. And the other thing that came out of this is looking at plant obsolescence. Our new tagline is technology moves faster than we do. So when it takes you 10, 20 years to build a nuclear facility, specifically in the IT realm, technology changes. So once we identified this problem with the controllers, we did do an expansive look across other commodities and equipment that we have, and we have identified a few other areas where we're finding that vendors aren't supporting the product lines that we have, and we're in the process of working on refreshing that and making sure that we do get parts and materials in that we can support for the long term. And we've asked Parsons to put a formal program in place so that we periodically do those reviews. It's not one-stop shopping, right? You're going to have to continually touch it, not only as we start up the facility, but when it's in operation. Overall, I do want to remind everyone that my commitment to the Deputy Secretary of Energy in 2014 was to start this plant up by January 31st of 2021. All of the dates that we've presented to you have been early dates. We have challenged ourselves. We want to get this puppy running. We want to get it done as quick as we can. But my commitment is January 31st of 2021 at $2.3 billion, and we have every intent to meet that commitment. Even the new dates are within the bounds of what we committed to the Deputy Secretary. Now let me talk about the next generation solvent. This is a different solvent. I won't say new. A different solvent that Jim Folk and the Liquid Waste Program has been testing in ARPMCU for last year, 2 years. And it's provided us with really great results. Increased capacity, increased decontamination factor. So we wanted to look at strategies where we could accelerate the implementation of next generation solvent into the salt waste flow sheet. So what we did is, and Parsons had previously tested this material in our Parsons Technology Center. So we already had some data that showed that it would work in salt waste. Again, Liquid Waste has been testing it. So back in January of this year, we negotiated a contract modification with Parsons. They're actually building an annex to the salt waste facility. We call it the NGS Cold Chemical Feed Facility. It's a Butler building with 3 big tanks in it, essentially, to allow the different chemicals to be fed into salt waste. That facility is about 76% complete. Their target is to finish it by December. We will construct it, we will turn it over, and we will do preliminary testing on it. And then we'll put it in layup and standby until it's ready to be used with the salt waste processing. We're actually beginning the planning for the system turnovers and testing, so they really are finishing construction here. I was in the facility last week, and it's starting to look about done, you know, everything's there, they just got a little cleanup work to do, some last minute piping and wiring. So this poises us as a plant and Mr. Folk as the liquid waste program owner to accelerate the implementation of next generation solvent when we get operational. We're also doing a few other strategic things. We're going to move forward. We're going to procure the next generation solvent quantities that we need for salt waste, have those ready. We're looking at our safety bases to understand what, if any, changes need to be made there. And we're also going to look at all of our procedures and try to understand the framework of what would have to be done in those, any procedure changes. At this point in time, the really only major physical modifications that would need to be made, aside from this annex, is we've got some tuning we have to do in the contactors. We have to adjust flow rates, weir heights, things like that, and we have a plan for how we would transition and test that. So we're really trying to be as proactive as we can to be ready for next generation solvent when the time comes. And I think it's probably everybody in here understands what that does in the big picture is it reduces the overall life cycle of liquid waste. So we can be out of liquid waste sooner if the next generation solvent produces what we anticipate it would. So in the end, just to wrap things up, you know, we're working really hard to get this facility running. There's no one who's more disappointed than me that we had this valve issue. We were really on a strong trajectory to get it done at the end of 18, but this is why we test. We test because we want to make sure we have an operational facility that's going to be good for the environment, the public, and the facility. As I mentioned, we don't really have any major technical or regulatory issues. We have a good leadership and a consistent leadership team. We haven't seen turnover on the federal side or the Parsons side. We are integrating well. We're getting support from Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, Savannah River National Lab, Liquid Waste Program. As we move forward, there are internal capabilities that the plant has that salt waste is leveraging and taking advantage of. So we're excited. We all got an extra year under our belts for retirement, but we are very excited to, again, see this process and facility mature, our workforce mature. It's just so much fun to see them mature as nuclear operators as we go forward and get ready for the end of 19. So with that, I'm sure a few of you have questions.
Let's start with Dawn.
Dawn Gillis Cab, thank you so much for your presentation and being able to get here for that. So,
No problem.
who was it that chose the EPIC positioner?
It was the design from Parsons. And again, Westlock is a very reputable company. Again, we incorporated three different products of theirs into our flow sheet based on the needs of the facility. It has to do with two-way, three-way, all kinds of different things. So we do not consider that there was any deficiencies in the design or the design selection.
That would have been an interesting conversation to be sitting in on, because seeing it from the 30,000-foot level, my first thing is, why are we paying for having to replace all those valves and taking the year hit on getting the facility operating?
Well, I will ensure you that the department looked very closely at that item, and I've answered that question many, many, many times.
Yeah.
But we looked hard at that, and again, Westlock is a very reputable company.
Okay, I guess we can't hit that many hours of discussion here, but that is an issue for my. But you guys took care of it, right? And this is the right thing. You know, it's this whole contracting thing of you know, I went round and round about different problems in the past too, and you know, you contract with a qualified technical contractor and expect them to provide equipment that's acceptable, and then you get this far into it and find out that you know, this kind of a problem, and then DOE takes a hit for it. So I guess there's nothing to do about it at this point, but I'm just concerned.
Verinder?
Narendra Malik, CAB. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation, and secondly, we wish you good luck for tomorrow's surgery.
Thank you very much.
My question is, I know we have a construction permit what permit will be required to operate?
I'm sorry.
What will be the operational permit? Is it going to be industrial wastewater permit, or?
Yes, we will get a separate permit to operate SWPF.
And has anybody calculated what the radioactivity, radionuclide emission will be, and other chemicals like mercury from the operation of salt waste processing facility?
In terms of
Emissions,
air and, yeah.
air emissions.
Yeah, we have environmental, we've done a full environmental compliance. We have waste acceptance criteria, environmental permits. I know Avery's here. At least I saw her, there she is. So, yeah, we've calculated all that, and it's all within the parameters of what the site authorizes.
And, pardon me, when DOE is going to perform final ORR on this facility?
As I mentioned, again, overall, we're going to see about a year delay is what we anticipate. So it'll be this time next year.
Thank you.
So don't ask me to present next October.
I have a few more questions, probably I'll ask you in private. Thank you.
Charles Hilton, Cab. Thank you, first of all, for the background on this. I'm a relatively new member, so it helps to get to where we're at today.
Good.
From Dawn's question, I think I know the answer to this. When the EPIC valves were changed out because they didn't work, DOE is bearing the cost of this?
We have a cost reimbursable contract with our contractor. So yes, we are bearing the cost of the replacements. And again, as I explained, it was a mutual decision made by the department and Parsons to do what we believed was the safest and most responsible thing for this situation.
Coming from private industry, I'm really struggling with this. And I built many plants and projects, and when there's a design flaw or either an equipment flaw, somebody pays other than the owner. We either go to the engineer for bad design, or we either go to the contractor or the supplier for providing us with things that don't meet the design parameters. I'm confused as to why. And you said this was a many-hour discussion, and perhaps you and I could talk afterwards or something. I don't understand why DOE is paying.
Okay. Well, like I said, fundamentally because we are under a cost reimbursable arrangement. I will also add that, of course, we have incentives with our contractor to perform to certain criteria, one of which is delivery on a certain schedule at a certain cost. Because of this issue, they have jeopardized a good portion of that incentive. And so that will be, so the government is getting some recovery as a result of this because of the incentive structure that we put in place.
Thank you.
Susan?
Susan Corbett, CAB. Thank you for your presentation. So I have a couple questions, but if other people, I don't want to dominate here, but I'm trying to understand this. So back on the very first page, the first thing you say, it will reduce the radioactive waste volume requiring vitrification. Could you explain what that means? How does that work?
Reducing
the waste volume, reduce radioactive waste volume requiring vitrification.
Jim, do you want to? I think our flow sheet's different than yours, and we're actually.
Jim Folk. Yeah, fundamentally, what this is referring to is to if you were processing all 35 million gallons or up to 100 million gallons once it's dissolved, that all of that would have to go through vitrification. If you did not take the steps that were taken with ARPMCU now and SWPF later. So remember the stream, we strip out all those actinides, we strip out the cesium, that's the component, and it makes from a volume percent, 1% or less, it's a very small percent of the total waste stream then only has to go to vitrification. The rest of it, the vast majority of the water ends up going over to Saltstone facility. So that's what that's referring to there.
Okay, and thank you. And then the next bullet says, so are you going to, when this is up and running, will that negate the need for the ARP and MCU? Will those go away? Or?
Yeah, yes, they will.
They'll
And-
go away, okay.
Yes, and there's a real benefit here in that story, is that we're using a fair amount of the infrastructure that supports ARP MCU and converting it over to infrastructure that supports SWPF. For instance, if we had to run another waistline from the tank farm all the way over to SWPF or all the way over to Saltstone, it would be a significant cost. So what we're doing is, at the right time, and that's part of the juggling act here, that we will shut down ARP MCU, flush that facility, get all that material out, and then we'll physically go in, change some connections that we already have largely in place, but jumpers, for instance, and then there are 2 hard lines that we have to tie in, and probably in a couple of months, then we'll switch over and start up with SWPF. So it was a cost savings approach in the long run.
Okay, thank you. And then, so right now there's 35 million gallons in the tanks, and we're going to dilute that again to end up with about 100 million gallons. Is
About
that,
3
did
to
I hear
1,
that?
yeah.
Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, it's about a 3 to 1, yeah.
So, and then the last bullet says you have a nominal capacity of 6 to 8, is that million gallons a year?
Mhm.
So,
And remember, an MCU now runs at about 1 million gallons a year.
okay, so how long would that take then?
About
in your
15 years.
estimation? How long?
15 to 20 years.
15 to 20 years
Yeah.
to do that? Okay.
1,000 divided by 7 is about 15, yeah. That's the life cycle we anticipate, but the next generation solvent, we expect that throughput to go up, and that's why I was mentioning earlier, once we implement that, we expect the life cycle of both SWPF and the liquid waste program to go down.
So
So
in-
again, huge savings to the government.
So in 15 to 20 years, we can expect those tanks to be emptied?
Yep.
That's really good to hear. And then the other thing, on the other page back in the little green box here, the second one, CS decontamination factor greater than 40,000. Could you elaborate that a little bit? What does that mean exactly?
That's just the ratio of what comes in the waste versus how much of it goes back to the DWPF, and that's why I mentioned earlier, when our decontamination factor goes up, those remaining curies go to Saltstone. So 40,000 of the curies go to DWPF, and the last one goes, right, essentially.
There was no, that was what I was asking for. What is 40,000 what? So it's 40,000 curies. So-
Well, it's just a ratio of
It's just
the
a
incoming
ratio.
versus what goes to Saltstone, so.
But you're correct, Susan, we primarily are measuring cesium in that whole process. so.
Right, and then at the end here, what do you anticipate is left in the final stream? How much radiation is there left at the very end when you've taken all the other stuff out? I mean, is there
There
any
is- You mean
going to
calculation of
Saltstone?
that?
Yeah, when we look at the total inventory of radioisotopes in the liquid waste tank farm, okay? And you look at the bottom line, if you look on, I think you're looking on slide 4. So we always look at it in terms of, well, if you look on slide 4, which is the, might be easier if you, yeah, there you
Right.
go.
Okay,
If-
that one.
If you look at slide 4, on the bottom 3 elements of there, you have tanks closed, you have the canisters in glass waste storage, and you have SDUs. When you go across that, by the time we're all said and done, greater than 98% of all isotopes, radioisotopes, will be in the vitrified glass logs.
Okay.
Less than 1% will be left behind in the tanks. Less than 1% will be left, would be shipped over to the SDUs,
Just salt to stone disposal.
to the Saltstone disposal units, right?
Okay.
So again, that was the point that Pam was making earlier with NGS. You know, we're 98 to 99% of everything we're gonna take out of that tank farm is gonna be up in vitrified glass logs ready to transfer offsite.
Go nowhere. Where are they going? We don't know. We don't know. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay?
Let's come over here and go to Dave Isley.
Dave Isaac, Cap. Thank you so much for that presentation. You mentioned the DSA and the TSR. Who is writing that document or that
My
said-
contractor, Parsons, generates those documents and the department approves them.
Okay, are they contracting that out? Do they have that capability internally?
Yes, sir.
Are you
They are-
confident that?
Oh, yes.
Okay, good.
We've had a significant level of oversight on that process.
Okay, and the SER, is that being generated by your staff?
Yes, sir.
you have qualified staff at the present time?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you so
Highly
much.
qualified. And we have reached out and actually brought in a number of very well-qualified support contractors to assist us in that.
Yeah,
Not only reviewing the Parsons deliverable, but developing.
That one's going to be a
business.
bear to write for sure. Has DNFSB been interested in those efforts?
Just a little bit.
Just a little
No.
bit.
No,
That's
we've
what I
had, they've been
suspected.
highly engaged. We've actually had, they write agendas, which is like they call them agendas. They're topics of discussion. We've had 2 agendas with them and 2 very week-long meetings to resolve or answer those questions. So they have been highly engaged, both from the headquarters perspective as well as the site level.
You can expect additional help.
I'm sure I will, but we're very confident in the work we've done and the product that we're generating. We've also had a high-level engagement with the Office of EA, Office of, I forget, Office of Assess, EA, EM, what's EA stand for? Enterprise Assessments, yeah. So they've been highly engaged also. So we've had a very collaborative working arrangement with our external regulators.
Thank you.
Larry?
Larry Powell, CAB. Thank you, Pam. Great presentation. You've already been beat up enough on these EPIC positioners, but I just wanted to try to get one thing clear in my mind. Are these devices off the shelf, or are they built just for this purpose? Did your engineers tell EPIC how to build them, or how did that really go?
They're essentially off the shelf. As I mentioned, they did some firmware development to make them adapt to but they weren't specialty made. That's why we were able to get the replacements in the 2-month period, because they were essentially off the shelf.
Okay, and one other question, the new generation solvents, what are these solvents and how do they differ from the old generation solvents?
Oh, we'd have to give you it's the size of the molecule that grabs the cesium. I guess basically the current molecule that we have has certain, they're huge molecule. You're a chemical engineer, right?
No, not an engineer.
I know, one of y'all were, but the molecule is huge, you know, it would take you the whole wall to draw it. But they have openings where they grab the cesium, and this one just has different types, and I think larger openings is the way I understand it, to be able to grab more of the cesium. So it's,
Okay.
it's a very complex molecule.
Okay, thank you.
Jim Gale, CAP. Thank you again for the presentation. As relatively new to all of this, it helps tremendously to get a sense of what's going on. I'm back to the EPIC positioners. In changing those out with the 2 other types that you were going to use, did you have to change firmware per installation, or is it a form factor change? What's involved in scope to replace an individual?
Actually, because we stayed with the Westlock product line, we were reasonably fortunate that the positioner bolted off. There was some additional rewiring that had to be done, not additional, but they had to be rewired. And then these are air-activated valves, so we had to do some retubing for the air. We were doing 5 to 8 controllers a day. So it wasn't, and that was with 2-man crews.
Okay.
So it was relatively straightforward.
All right. Now, the firmware is in the encoder or in the positioner.
Right.
And then it's DOE software that is interfacing with that?
No, it's Parsons software.
It's Parsons software.
Parsons designed and built well, they use the support contractor, the Delta V I mentioned.
Okay.
They do that, but no, this is all Parsons. That's why we had both of them come in. Like I said earlier, initially we weren't sure whether it was the controller or it was the system talking to the controller.
Okay, thank you.
Greg Murray, CAB. Thank you again for the presentation. Going back to your flow chart of, I guess, the self-assessments and all that, I too am new to all this. So how long do these self-assessments usually take?
Typically, the review itself takes about 2 to 3 weeks, and then of course you have follow-up. You'll have issues that are identified, and depending on the number and magnitude of those issues, that's highly variable. It could be, if we're lucky, it'll take a few more weeks. If we're not lucky, it could take months. It just depends what's uncovered. But we have all that built into our schedule. The DOE operational readiness review, we typically allocate 2 to 3 months from beginning to end. And of course, there's a lot of prep work leading up to those, but those don't show up on your critical path.
Okay.
There's formal review plans, we have formal lines of inquiry, all of that. So it's not just a bunch of people showing up and deciding what they look at on a given day.
Right.
Very
right.
formal.
Sure. Oh, that's what I figured, and that's why I'm kind of surprised the baseline sounds like 2 to 3 weeks. It seems like it'd be much longer, but you said
Well, that's
you're
just to
scheduling.
do the review. Like,
Right,
so there's
right,
a lot
right.
of prelims, and then there's follow-up. But
Right.
the boots on the ground part, where they're in the field, is typically around 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay, thank you. And I guess like some of my colleagues, I'm on the positioner thing, but I'll leave it at this question because it seems like maybe one of the major problems has to do with the type of contract. You referred to a cost reimbursable contract.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean exactly?
It means we reimburse the contractor's costs. It's not fixed price. It's cost reimbursable. So whatever they spend within the guidelines of their contract requirements, the department pays for. And then we have incentives that we put in place to encourage them to finish things cheaper and faster.
So technically, they bought the positioners? Is that what you're saying? So
Yeah.
Parsons bought. So it seems like this is between Parsons and Westlock.
Well, it was, and they resolved the technical issue. We didn't step in and tell them how to resolve it. We just agreed with their path forward in terms of whether, the 3 options that I laid out.
Mhm.
But no, Parsons dealt with Westlock on what was the appropriate technical path. They wrote the procurement specs, they purchased the materials.
Okay, thank you.
Doug?
Doug Howard Cap. Great presentation, Pam.
Thank you.
And thanks for what you do.
Thank you.
And God's blessing on your operation tomorrow.
Thank you.
Just have a couple of questions for you. And the first one, going back to the controllers, positioners, whatever they're called. Did you give us the cost of the replacement, or is it on here? Of
No,
what it
I
cost
didn't
overall?
include that. The physical cost of the controllers themselves and the labor is around $5 million.
Okay. The other question that I have is, could there have been a lower scale type of a modeling testing that could have been done, which could have given you an earlier indication of problems with these controllers?
Well, we did do, when we came out of construction, we did do some functional testing. We obviously made sure the controllers were they were communicating and the positioners were activating. This gets more into the sophistication of how they're operating in the integrated process environment. But I don't want to lead you to believe that we didn't do any testing on them. And obviously they get, there's factory acceptance testing, the vendor has to do some testing before they deliver. Not every positioner, but they have to do some testing. I am not at all convinced that we would have discovered this problem through more in-depth testing early in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Susan, you have additional questions?
I do. Susan Corbett, Cab. So you mentioned solvents. This is something that we've heard a lot about here, at least I have. There's a lot of contamination on the site, I believe, from solvents like trichloroethylene is one of them we see in the groundwater here. So I'm wondering, do you have a name for this is there a name for this new solvent?
Max Calyx.
What is it?
The current one is Bob Calyx, and the new one is Max Calyx. Again, it's a uniquely synthesized material for our operation. You don't buy it off the shelf.
Is it carcinogen? Is it dangerous to humans?
No.
It's not? So the other question I had is that what releases will come out of this facility? Will there be releases in water water emissions or air emissions of any kind?
Well, we have controlled air emissions. We have release criteria that comply with our permits. I mean, you never run a facility like this and say it's zero, but they are very low and very limited. We have water permits, air permits, all of those.
And would they would they have small amounts of radiation in them, or would it be more solvent material, or what would you?
We don't, there won't be solvent material. Again, extraordinarily low levels of radiation, probably beyond what are picocurie levels, right?
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, Jim Folk, let me add to that just a little bit. And, you know, from a solvent perspective, this is essentially a closed loop system. So the solvent is not like a once-time used, like you may be thinking of from industrial applications that are used for cleaning purposes or something like that. This is again, I'll use the term closed loop, but it is fully recovered. So it goes through, it picks up the cesium as it goes through the long chemical process. The cesium then is discharged from that solvent. The solvent is then taken back and regenerated. So this is a closed loop system that we don't expect essentially any release of that solvent material.
So you actually reuse that solvent?
Yes, it's, for instance, I can't remember exact number, but you've bought something like
600
gallons, right? And I think that we don't expect to use much, you know, for instance, with our MCU process, we haven't lost, I don't know that we've done any. I won't say never. I think somebody said never use never, but, you know, very, very small amount of makeup is ever used in that process. We expect that to last the bulk of the process.
Pretty much the whole life of the facility, yeah.
Charles, you hit on a good topic there. Trying to formulate a question without sounding really irate. So you had answered part of his question that there's the incentive part of the contract. Do we know if that incentive is going to be impacted by this amount, by this $5 million amount, or?
Oh, way more.
Way more? Excellent. Great answer.
All right, anything else for Pam? Pam, thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank you guys. Good seeing you again.
All right, folks. We ready to talk about a couple of open recommendations we have? I believe these are on schedule on the agenda for tomorrow to be closed. But I thought we'd take a moment now and talk about, you know, go ahead and get that out of the way, why the committee decided to close it, and have any discussions that need to be had. Is that all right? If you don't mind, let's start with the reclassifying the high-level waste. And Dawn, I think that was yours. Your committee in your absence decided that closing this would be the best thing to do.
And Dawn Gillis Cab, I'd looked at it before and I totally agree with that.
All right. Do you have any thoughts that you want to share with the group on why?
This is something that was not something that can be quickly implemented. It was not something that was in control of the site. It's something that's going to be a system-wide thing, a big, you know, change DOE order. It's not something, but it's something that if we don't start saying it here, that, and, you know, and then everybody else is saying it too, that it wouldn't get done. So the whole key here is to give the idea and get it going forward, but the site itself doesn't have direct control. But the fact that the response also said that DOASR will provide updates to the CAB as significant developments occur. So I would expect to offer, not wait for us to ask for those, but as they come in to let us know what's going on with that. Because that's not a quick process either, so that's why I'm okay with it.
Any questions about that one? Okay, no. So the other one that was decided for closure was the budget, pension, and scope one. And Tom, Dan, do one of you want to talk a little bit about why we're good with closing this and moving forward?
Yeah, Tom French, the cab. DOE's response was very complete to our recommendation, and it's sort of like the high-level waste. The ulterior motive we had for putting this in was also to get people's attention focused on the potential pitfall in the future. I think they got the attention. I think they've seen some improvement in the budget already. Hopefully they'll continue to do that. But it's got a much broader understanding also in the community. So I think we can go ahead and close it.
Dan, did you have any other thoughts that you wanted to add to that? All right, folks, are there any other questions on the budget, pension, and scope recommendation? that we need to go ahead and clear out now? No? We're going to be ready to vote on that tomorrow then? Awesome. Okay, well then let's start working on some draft recommendations. What do you say? Let's start with the chair's recommendation. And Doug, since you were there in the room, do you mind walking over with everybody what this is about? Now keep in mind, as Doug is talking about this is a chair's recommendation, so we're not going to tinker with it, and there's no wordsmithing that we get to do. You either vote it up or down tomorrow. Okay, is there any questions about that process and why it is the way it is? It's because every board needs to vote on it exactly the same way. Okay, Doug, I'll let you go.
Yes, James. Doug Howard Cab. This was brought up during the meeting there in D.C. And basically, well, I could read the background here. The Environmental Site-Specific Advisory Board understands that successful completion of the DOE-EM mission must include community, public, and stakeholder education and engagement. This engagement can be developed and implemented in any of the several different forms that reflect the public interest in stage of cleanup combined with the complexity and uniqueness of each of the cleanup site managed by DOE-EM. Because of the variety of sites and different cleanup schedules, we are presenting a suite of potential activities that can be implemented at varying levels at each of the sites, but are applicable to all in some form. Individual site-specific advisory boards are in the perfect position to help develop and recommend implementation strategies on each of these activities. Advisory board involvement would help the site enhance its outreach by providing advice related to specific targeted areas based on feedback from actual communities and individuals who live near or are potentially impacted by site activities. And it goes on to list the potential activities. I need to read those? Okay.
Under the recommendation on the back side.
Okay. The recommendation is we recommend that the individual site managers and designees and the advisory boards work together to discuss and determine which activities best suit their circumstances and respond to public needs. The detailed depth and implementation plan should result from this collaborative effort.
So let me tell you what Nevada did and where this came from. Nevada's board, their CAB, they did a study themselves. The board members did it. They polled the community to find out what how the community was learning about their site, about their EM program. So they did this survey, they put it out in the community, they gathered all the results, and out of that survey they put together a short paper. I think it was just a few pages long, and then put together a recommendation to their department, to their field office on, hey guys, this is where the community is getting their information from. Here's what we think you could be doing differently to supplement that effort. So that's where this came from. When headquarters saw that, they loved it, and they asked the chairs to take a look at doing something similar. And so that's what this recommendation really kind of is asking DOE to task the boards with taking a look at all the different public outreach avenues, not that the board is taking, but that the field office is taking, that DOE is taking. Are there any questions for Doug on this and what their thoughts were, or any questions about it in general? Joyce wants to ask a question.
Joyce Underwood, CAB. Isn't this already what community outreach does from the Department of Energy?
So they don't, I'm not going to say that they don't do a self-assessment, but this would be an external assessment by the board. Again, if what you decided to do took the same form as what they did, it would be an assessment by you of community attitudes of what they're doing. So it's not even trying to do outreach in and of itself. It's taking a look at the effectiveness of the outreach that's being done by the department.
How is it, how they do it?
They put together a survey on trying to asking some general questions on how did you learn about how do you get news about the site? How do you learn about X, Y, Z? Where do you get information on this? And it was real general questions. Now this could take a lot of different forms. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
How'd they disseminate it?
I believe they sent it out, their board members sent it out via like a SurveyMonkey link or something like that. They didn't have a huge response rate. I think, they had some that were, some questions they had one response, and then some questions they had about 100 responses. So it really kind of depended on where it was and what was going on.
And you said this was just Nevada that did it, but they
Yes.
had a good response
But
from the
well,
department.
the department really loved the idea of what they had put together.
Okay.
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 Charles.
Charles Hilton Cab. I'm a little bit confused, as I usually am, as to how we operate differently. I commend DOE in being very forthright with us when we ask difficult questions. I mean, it's not always pleasant when we're sitting here for the DOE officials, but if they can't answer it, they get us answers. And I'm very much appreciative of that. And maybe because South Carolina, or at least Aiken County, is more of a pro-nuclear state, this message seems to be getting out into our area fairly well. Is there a bigger problem in Nevada, or?
I don't know.
I don't know. I'm struggling to see what we're doing.
So, how about this? Those are your impressions amongst people that you know and interact with. So what does the broader community think, and how does the broader community feel about it? And again, that study, the survey, how Nevada did it, is one avenue. It's not the end-all, be-all of what has to be done if you support this effort and support the general statement that the recommendation is making.
As a follow-up to that, I appreciate getting more information, but I'm retired. I go out to eat in a little local restaurant every morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the public is generally aware of what's going on at the facility. And this is not me. I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah.
But this is general public. If they want to know, there seems to be a tremendous amount of information out there that DOE or the contractors are releasing to us. I don't have a problem with this. I'm just trying to.
You also got to think that it's a whole different scale to some degree. So Nevada, their site is kind of flipped on its head from ours. They're mostly NNSA missions and about a 10% EM component. Then you've got sites like Paducah and Portsmouth. They're much smaller, and they don't have maybe the abilities or the resources to put out as much as Savannah River does.
That makes sense.
Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, CAB. I want to respond to Mr. Hilton. I came by being on this board in a very strange way, and as a resident of Columbia County, I can attest to the fact that a lot of, first of all, there's on the Georgia side, I feel like there's a very transient community because of the military base. People come, people go, people might hear about the Savannah River site. They really don't know what it does, and that's if they hear about it. The only people that I have met that know that it's there in my day-to-day goings are people who work there. So if they don't work there, and a lot of people that I encounter just don't know that it's there and don't know anything about it. So, I mean, I understand in Aiken County it's different because that's where it's located, but I think in the greater CSRA area, there might be a level of ignorance about the site and what it does that may need to be addressed by the Department of Energy, and I brought that up several times throughout my time on this board. So I think this is really valuable, and I think that's why they want to do it. I mean, the level of misinformation that I hear about the site is mind-boggling too. Apparently there's radioactive deer that are black, which there aren't, but this is things that I've heard. So I don't know. I mean, I can see like if you write up on it and everybody in the community works there, you know things about it. But the further out you get in the stakeholder area, I think the less the community knows. especially like once you get really far downriver. I don't know because I don't live that far downriver, but I wonder like how much, is it on the news in Hilton Head? Is it on the news in Savannah? I don't know. I lived in Savannah and I never heard about it.
Let's get a different voice in, and then I'll come back over to you. Doug?
Doug Howard Cap. Yeah, Joyce, what Joyce is saying is I'm in agreement with that, in the fact that I live in Evans, Georgia, moved here in 2012, and up until the time that I really started working with the cab, I knew very little about what goes on here at SRS. Of course, we all know that SRS was being built back in the 50s. And my father was stationed at Fort Gordon back in the 60s. And I still, didn't know what was going on out here or didn't understand. Of course, they had a different mission back then. And with the mission that SRS has today, a lot of people don't really fully understand what they're doing out here. Some people still think that they're out here making bombs. So I haven't seen a lot of advertisement or a lot of reports out there where people where I live at and other places a little further from the plant here really understand what goes on out here. So I can fully understand what they're talking about with this recommendation.
Greg?
Greg Murray, CAB. Just a quick question on the recommendation itself. Can we go back up at the top for a second? There's an odd sentence with a strange semicolon up there, and I'm not sure if something's missing. Look at the, what is that, the fourth line? It's that sentence, this engagement can be developed and implemented in any of several different forms that reflect public interest in stage, in semicolon. I can't tell if something's missing from the recommended. I wouldn't expect that there. That seems strange to me.
We can check with headquarters.
Okay, that's fine.
That might be a sentence that needs to be cleaned up from.
I think this question of what people know about the site is an empirical question, and you can ask people basically what do you know about each of the different things. My suspicion is people view it as a place that employs a lot of people, and that's probably the extent of a lot of people's knowledge of really what goes on out here. I think there need to be a decision in terms of what information are we interested in people having to disseminate. The one thing that I would strongly urge, if we're going to do something like the Nevada folks did, I saw a little bit of the report. I'm somebody who used to do survey research, and I guess I still do to a degree. If we're going to do it, we need to do it with enough rigor that we have confidence in what has been found. I would not make any major decisions based on, in all due respect to the Nevada folks, I wouldn't make any major decisions based on their report. There's not enough sample, it's not representative. The questions weren't particularly insightful, I don't think. So if we do it, I hope we'll do it in a way that it generates meaningful information that we can do something with.
Any other thoughts on this recommendation? None that we need to share today? Are we ready to vote on this tomorrow? Yes, I got some head shakes over here. Yeah? All right, folks. So we'll vote on this one tomorrow. Up next, let's pull out Pollinator Management Program. And that one is Joyce, right? That one's yours?
Joyce Underwood, CAB. Do I need to read the whole thing?
You don't have to. You can summarize it, and then we'll cover what the recommendations are.
Okay, so this is coming in response to the presentation given by Dr. Rhodes at the last meeting where he spoke about the pollinators. And I have a great debt to Larry for putting this together and then letting me tweak it. The issue is with the bees mostly, but all the pollinators broadly. So as you know, pollinators are essential and we need more of them. So we would like to enable Dr. Rhodes to study pollinators, or the Savannah River Ecology Lab, the Savannah River Ecology Lab, to better study and protect the pollinators. So the recommendation is, number 1, plant wildflowers in the right-of-ways throughout the site in order to study the effects of electromagnetic fields on pollinator species. 2, plant pollen-generating flowers, trees, and shrubs throughout the site in order to further study the effects of various environmental facts, which I think should be factors, but I'm not sure, on pollinator species. Flowering shrubs could be used for landscape accents around buildings. Pollen-bearing trees, such as the tupelo and poplar, should be encouraged in wetlands. 3, consider the impact on pollinators before harvesting trees or clearing areas of vegetation. 4, designate one single entity to monitor and approve the application of any and all insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides that are used anywhere on the site. This entity should be under the control of the Savannah River Ecology Laboratory. SREL could work with local beekeeping organizations for input on the program. Fire ant control and mosquito control measures should be monitored, as well as the activities of any commercial pest control company hired by the site. The Forestry Service and South Carolina Department of Natural Resources should be notified that any chemical applications must be approved. Questions, comments, concerns?
All right, folks, let's go. Let's start with Tom.
Tom French, the cab. I think it's a good recommendation, but it's got way too many specifics. You're asking the department to actually funnel down and control every item of chemical application on the site. They're not going to be able to answer that, yes, we'll go look into it, or yes, we'll do that. If you give more general recommendations, like we recommend you have a pollinator preservation program, and I recommend that you have one person do it, but not say it has to be the ecology lab, I think it would give enough room that DOE could answer, because right now SRS is responsible for all of the chemicals that are used on site. There is a chemical control group. So there are people out there that do this already, but maybe it doesn't hit the right button. So if DOE has some flexibility of, yes, SRS does this and we're going to make them sensitive to this pollinator issue. Does that make sense? No?
Larry Powell, Cap. Tom, I think that this probably, to me, is one of the most important parts of this recommendation. Right now, you've got the Forest Service, say for instance, pine beetles. They go out there and they spray for pine beetles. Then we've got a different company altogether that would control fire ants, and they go out and put out insecticides for fire ants. None of these single individual people are putting out enough insecticide that makes a heck of a lot of difference. But if you take into the fact that the Forest Service is putting out insecticides, commercial companies are putting out insecticides, Lord knows the peach growers that are off-site are spewing it everywhere. But it's an accumulative effect, and it just seems to me like that if you had one entity that if you're going to put out an insecticide somewhere in the plant, there should be somebody that knows what that cumulative effect is. And that's why I think it's important that even though killing the fire ants may not have an effect on the pollinators, the cumulative effect certainly would. So that's why I think that's important.
So when you apply anything at the site, there is a committee that has to approve it. But the committee is managed by SRS, and SRS has a staff that investigates all the different chemicals. But I'm not sure they're sensitive to the pollinator issue. So maybe that's why I was saying make the recommendation to DOE to make these people sensitive to the pollinator issue of how they're applying the chemicals, because I don't know they are or not. The ecology lab is really a very, very small entity. And if you give them a task of this magnitude, they'd have to staff up just to be able to handle all the chemicals and all the chemical requests, because it's hundreds every day throughout all the facilities. So I think it's a great idea. I'm agreeing with 100%. I would give DOE more latitude in how to go do this.
So it seems like, Tom, the the problem sentence for you really is that this entity should be SREL.
Right.
And if that wasn't designated in this,
Right.
you'd feel better about it.
Yeah, just to give Steve more room to get a good answer back.
I see your point there. SREL, the reason that was worded that way was because they're most closely related to the field of entomology, which is insects and all the pollinators. And I don't know of another entity on Savannah River site that's that closely related to the study of insects. But I did say that the entity should be under the control of, not necessarily a part of SREL, but should be maybe monitored by SREL, or the buck stops here with SREL or something like that.
So let's keep that in mind, and let's get some other voices in the conversation and figure out where we are. So let's go to Dave and then Mary.
Dave Isley, Cap. I'm going to give some more ammunition to Tom. I'm looking at this. It's way too specific. A one-liner, I think, is all you need. When you start talking the right-of-ways, that's all managed by SCE&G. All of the forests are managed by the forestry department. So, when you throw this out, the DOE with all these specifics, they're just going to go, we just can't do this. But it's something like, we saw the briefing on the pollinators, and we have a concern. We think you can do something about it. What can you do? And just leave it at that. And let them come back with how they might manage a program that would assist in that area. My thought.
Mary?
Mary Weber, CAB. Thank you, Joyce and Larry, for your work on this. It is an important issue, and we tried something similar a few years ago, which is the subject, I think, more of Dan's recommendation. My concerns are they were about 4, but that's been addressed quite a bit. But my concerns are about 1 or 2, because I'm not sure what your intent with 1 and 2 were. If you read it one way, you're asking the DOE to actually conduct a study. And I don't think that's under their, purview to do. I would say that recommendations 1 and 2 should be more along the lines of the way that number 3 is worded, because I really don't think we want to ask the DOE to actually get into conducting a study, because we know what the answer to that will probably be. Joyce, what were your thoughts when you wrote it that way?
Yeah, I can claim full responsibility for number 1, number 2, 3, and 4. I'll give over to Larry because he knows way more about that than I do. Dr. Rhodes in his presentation last month, oh yeah, I'm Joyce Underwood, CAB, by the way. I'm sorry. He said, he talked about the right-of-ways and about the electromagnetic fields and whatnot. And just like you said, we can't request them to do a study. He can't request us to do a study. But I think that there is some value in studying that particular issue, especially with colony collapse and whatnot, So I don't know how to better word it because I've never done this before, but I think it's complicated because Mr. Eisel said that the right-of-ways are under someone else's purview, correct?
The high lines are managed by SCE&G.
Right, so I don't know. You're probably right. It's probably not something that they're going to say yes on, but I think there's value in letting them know it's something to think about, maybe. And then, before I forget, number 4, the pollinator. I have a question about the pollinator preservation program. So, like, you said that you deal with the fire ants with one chemical and you deal with the wasps with another chemical, correct? So it's a lot of different things that get used, and one by one it's not a big deal, but cumulatively it becomes a big deal. And I don't know the answer to this, that's why I'm asking, is there an entity somewhere that has a list and says we use this on this day for this bug and that's on this day for this bug? Yeah. That entity exists?
Yeah. And it's, if I can jump in, Tom French, that there is a committee. There's an entity that controls all those lists of approved chemicals, but there's a committee. Ecology Lab's on the committee, Forest Service is on the committee, SRS is on the committee, SR is on the committee, Wackenut's on the committee, and what they do is they look at their operation and impact on the whole site, the environment. What I don't know that they're sensitive to, which I think you're getting at here, is what's the impact on the pollinators? And I think that's what Gene was saying. It's a really important message.
So let's do this. If I'm going to put words in your mouth and you tell me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Okay. It seems like you're thinking that number 4 really could just be written to say, you know, the SRS cab instructs or recommends the DOE instruct the pesticide committee to consider the effects on pollinators before approving applications. Period. The cumulative effects. So what do you think of that?
Me?
Sure. Anybody.
I think it's valid. I think that's good. Do we have latitude to say that SREL should be a part of that committee? Or recommend? Do we have latitude to recommend that?
Yes, I think that you can recommend that. Now, whether or not the department's going to act on that is, of course, at their discretion on their response. But yes, you can recommend that.
And I believe they are.
Okay. Well, if they are.
They don't
All right.
control it, though.
Right, okay.
All right, so let's get some of the other thoughts in here. I know that, let's actually just go down. Mary, you went, did you have some more follow-up?
Mary Weber Cab, I'm just following up on my comments. I understand that the study is, the study of the effects are important, and I think that you might be able to just reword 1 and 2 so that it doesn't appear that you're actually directly recommending that DOE conduct the study itself. You could say something on the order of, in order for other entities such as SREL to have the opportunity to study that. You just have to tweak it a little bit so that it doesn't make it appear that you're asking DOE to actually go out and conduct a study. You're only asking them to consider the planting of certain types of flora so that someone can take the opportunity to make a study.
Greg? I gotta go around, Jim, I'm sorry.
Greg Murray, Cab. Is there such thing as a pollinator management plan now?
Hey, that's a fun question.
If there, what has occurred to me is that if we don't have such a plan, maybe part of this recommendation should be something to the effect of, we'd like to recommend that whoever does this sort of thing explores putting together a pollinator management plan in an effort to enhance the pollinator population at SRS and learn more about it. And it could be, go on to say, this might include studying things such as, whatever, flowers in the right-of-ways and all that sort of thing, and go at it that way. Just a thought on doing that. I think we need a plan. It seems to me like we need a plan, or somebody needs a plan if we're actually going to do something along these lines.
All right. So let's go to Charles, Susan, and then Jim.
Charles Hilton, the cab. First of all, the good part about me, I'm a farmer and a beekeeper, so I strongly support 1, 2, and 3. However, number 4, as a farmer and one who has held a commercial applicator license as well as private applicator licenses, this field is highly regulated as to what you can use and when you can use it. I'm concerned that we're creating something here. James, go back to what you suggested with the cumulative effects, somebody look at all of these things. Mm-hmm. What happens, one guy sprays it, somebody else sprays, and we don't probably look at cumulative effects. But who that individual is, I think we're way too specific. Let DOE figure it out. I go back to Greg's suggestion that we have a pollinator management plan. We have a plan for everything else at SRS. Like I said, I like what we're doing here, but I think when I get to number 4, I'm struggling with how you do this. Every time I use a herbicide, pesticide, insecticide, fungicide, I have to keep records on it, even as a private individual. And those can be monitored by the state board at any time they choose to do it.
Okay. Susan?
Susan Corbett, Cab. So I really appreciate Joyce's concern about this. We know that I quit buying plants from Home Depot because all of their plants are sprayed with neonicotinoids, which are proven to be devastating to bee colonies. And so I think it is important that we pay attention here, but I think it would be really missing a huge opportunity if we study bees at Savannah Riverside, if we don't also study the impacts of the constant exposure to low-level radiation and other contaminants that are in the environment, because it would be ignoring the obvious thing that the bees are being exposed to. It would be a wonderful study to see how colonies in SRS compare to bee colonies around the rest of the country. And there's been a lot of studies of insects that show how these things impact them. So it would be something worth doing. And along with that, study other issues as well. But I think that it would be really egregious to miss an opportunity and to not factor in that as part of your study. But that being said, I agree that we should plant more pollinator plants, and we should control any kind of sprays and not spray Roundup and neonicotinoids on the bees.
Thank you, Susan. Jim?
Jim Gielcap. I definitely support the recommendation in principle as to what it's trying to accomplish. I do have a problem with the first 2 recommendations as being very, very specific. As in most of these issues, it's going to come down to money at some point. I think that can be handled by asking the DOE to provide adequate funds for improvements on site for habitat for bees or other pollinators. So something along those lines where the recommendation begins by asking to allocate money. As far as the last part of it, certainly we have Dr. Rhodes as an expert, can provide that input, but I agree there's got to be some sort of centralized monitor and control over the various chemicals and other agents that we use here on the site. My comments.
Larry, did you have some more?
Thank you, James. Larry Powell, Cab. Just a final thought. Charles, I too am a beekeeper. I didn't realize you were, and it is a lot of fun. I too have held a commercial pest control license. I do know that by holding this license that you are trained up front, but I can't remember in the 10 years that I owned a pest control company of ever having any oversight government entity coming in to ask me what I was using or what I did, and I don't think it's regulated very well. I do think that Greg had a great point that instead of designating a single entity, to create a pollinator committee that would oversee the use of pesticides and fungicides and so forth on the site. So maybe we could wordsmith that a little bit into having, instead of, Joyce, if it's okay with you, instead of having a designated single entity, we might say that Department of Energy would create a pollinator committee or a person who is a pollinator that would oversee the use of insecticides on the plant. Would that make everybody feel better?
So let's do this. One, let's all recognize that there are 2 beekeepers in the room and no one's brought any honey. 2, we have a lot of suggestions. It seems like there's, in general, support for this and a lot of tweaks, though, that need to be made. So we have two options. One, does everybody feel like we can make these changes after the meeting? You know, Joyce can sit down and do that, or are the changes so extensive that we need to go back to committee and work? Joyce is like, yes, do that. So you want to move it back to committee, and let's rehash this. And so there's a wealth of suggestions that came around. If you cannot be at the October FDSR meeting, then you need to send them to Joyce in advance so that they can be worked in. You know, take the time, read over the recommendation again, and email your comments back to her, and we'll take all those comments and we'll go over them at the committee meeting. If you can be there, even better. How does that sound? All right, so let's do that.
Now I know why you're in charge.
Oh, I'm not in charge. So if we're going to shelve that one, we won't vote on it tomorrow. Let's cover the other one. Dan, can you cover the other recommendation for us?
Sure. First, I'd like to thank Narinder for doing a lot of the background research and the initial draft of this, so thank you, Narinder. Secondly, I don't think we have the same specific issues as the last recommendation, because the three recommendations, two are to consider a specific topic, and the third is quite a bit different, a little more direct. But the background, just kind of given a synopsis of what this is all about. The presentations for the D area, Ash Basin, and the way the progress has been going with regards to the landfill and how that was constructed, along with Dr. Rhodes's pollinator presentation, kind of got the juices flowing with regards to some ideas. So one point on the background that I'd like to point out, because it's a kind of an interesting detail, the layers are covered by a 20-inch layer of common fill. You have a geosynthetic clay layer, which is a membrane, and you have a geosynthetic drainage layer, which is also another type of membrane. Those aren't exactly replicant of soil conditions. So, and that kind of takes us into the discussion part, which is mainly about ideas that please consider and look at how we're creating these layers. What we have in natural soil conditions in the areas, we have a sandy soil. I think most of you are familiar with the kind of soil you have in your yards. But typically, if you dig down deep enough, you're going to hit clay. And that clay, basically nothing really goes through, nothing of any significance, that is, unless if something burrows through it. So fast forwarding down to the recommendations, CAB recommends that DOESR consider design improvements that include an actual clay barrier above the GCL and GDL for future landfills so that local flowering plants, clover and grass, can be planted and monitored on top of the landfill. Number two, consider shallow-rooted wildflowers, grasses, and clover indigenous to the area that would also provide habitat for pollinators. And number three, plant indigenous wildflowers and other pollinator habitat plants surrounding D area, Ash Basin, and other areas not impacted by the GCL, GDL concerns. So basically those considerations are just look at these things for future developments, see what is possible, what is not. This may be an ungrounded recommendation in some of those, but the experts would have the better say on that than we would. But there would be nothing really stopping us from encouraging the whole pollinator thing with the surrounding areas of those landfills. And in this particular instance, we're talking about D area. But in general, any of them, we're trying from the EM, from our environmental mission, is to make this back to nature. And if we're doing things that have disrupted nature, which we clearly have, getting them back to some sort of indigenous state to help recover the areas is really our end goal. So that's kind of where these recommendations come from. So pick it apart.
All right. Questions, comments, concerns, needs for clarification? Larry.
Comment. I'm going to defer to Charles over there. Charles, shouldn't they, instead of just planting grass from a farming standpoint, shouldn't they more or less rotate the crop or rotate the the type of plant material growing, like planting clover to produce nitrogen in the soil, wouldn't it be better for the soil as a whole to do that anyway?
Charles Hilton, Cab, I think the expense of that, as well as continual driving over this barrier, is going to prevent that, would be my first guess. I'm not an engineer on soil science, but there's a lot of wildflower mixes that you can buy in the seed business. They are expensive, but at the same time, if you put them in there and you put in the perennials, then hopefully you can not have to do it every couple of years, but every several years.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go down the road. Don?
Dawn Gillis Cab. I know that one of the issues with any of the barriers is what you mentioned in here is the shallow rooted thing. And I know one of the issues is keeping, I mean, I have a hayfield and trying to keep cherry trees and all the different things that the birds drop around, keeping them out without mowing it is a problem. And having any of those kind of things that are going to grow down in between that barrier is going to be a problem. So, you know, then you see down the highway, you see all the poppy growing there. I don't see any trees growing up in there, but, you know, I guess they do mow that occasionally. But I know there's going to be issues like that. I think it's a great idea. I would love to see all those things covered with poppy fields, but you know, I think it's a good thing to ask them to see what can be done for the pollinators and to try to get it back to some level of you know, natural without damaging the cover. But yeah, so I think it's a good idea. Just let them come back and tell us, well, we really can't do it because, or we can do it around the edge, or whatever they come back with. Not being real specific like the other one, so.
Narendra?
Narendra Malik, Cab. I think if we go back to the regulations, CERCLA and RECRA, landfill closure caps, it requires regular mowing of the vegetation on the cap. The reason is so the tree roots or other roots do not penetrate and the water does not infiltrate into the landfill. However, what Dan is recommending is that put the low, shallow-rooted flowers there, and it'll be much better than mowing and spending more money. Just go around once a month and pull up the trees if there are visible trees or any bushes which may penetrate deep. So that way we will be complying with the regulatory requirements of CERCLA and RECRA, and still we'll have enough beautification of the area too.
Okay. Joyce?
Joyce Underwood, Cab. Obviously, I support this, I voted for it in committee. But I have a question, because I remember us talking about this back during the presentation, and it just occurred to me. If we plant these flowers, right, they're going to kind of grow back. We don't have to keep planting them, right?
Only if you did annuals.
Well, the reason I ask is because I remember them talking about the ants and the gopher turtles and the moles, and they have to like walk it. And if we planted flowers, wouldn't it like impede that? Is that a
Sure
problem?
it would. Of course, it would really be contingent on how big these plants are.
Right.
Not
I
everything grows 4 feet tall.
True, true. I remember that there was some sort of an issue about the anthills and that I had to
Well,
walk it to look for the anthills.
I guess, you know, the underlying factor of the recommendation too is somewhere along the line we just came to this blanket plant grass.
Right.
So, and I think sidebar discussions, we never really confirmed it, but they mow basically twice a year. So part of this is if you take low-growing vegetation that is indigenous to the area and plant it, it used to be self-maintaining to a certain degree, obviously, and then in some areas you'll get the trees, things like that. But if you've already planted low-growing, shallow-rooted plants, a tree that pops up, instead of mowing in 6 months, you visit the field in 6 months, and you go take that tree out.
Right. with regard to the ants, and this relates back to the other recommendation, they have to spray the ants because the ants are a risk to the cap, right? Yeah, so if we're planting these pollinator species to encourage the presence of pollinators, and then we're spraying for the ants, are we also killing the pollinators, thus negating the whole point with the pollinator angle? No. Okay.
Dawn has a thought.
Typically, sprayer ants are usually done with bait versus spray.
Right.
So you can sprinkle bait out, that I don't think the bait necessarily impacts the pollinators.
Okay, so we can kill the ants and not kill the bees, is what I'm hearing? Okay. Awesome.
Any other thoughts? Are there any changes that we need to make? Any kind of wordsmithing that needs to happen to this one? Yeah, Greg.
Greg Murray, Cab. I seem to pretty clearly remember them talking about they've talked about this before and killed it because they didn't want things growing down into the caps. So I mean, I support this just like I do the other one. But I'm pretty sure we just had this conversation even on that tour that we did a week or two ago that they didn't think it was advisable. So that doesn't mean we can't put this forward. But I just don't know how it's going to come out because I think they've answered this question before.
Joyce.
Joyce Underwood, Cab. I think we're putting it forward because there's a possibility that if they examine it closer, they might change their mind, kind of like the recommendation to make some of the high-level waste transuranic waste. That is the recommendation, right? I didn't mess that up. Okay, so maybe it's that kind of an idea. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. I sound very unconfident. I'm sorry.
So, yes, Dawn.
Just a real quick one, Dawn Gillis, Cab. Even if it doesn't go on top of the actual cap, there's a lot of space around the caps. That can be done too as well, and even the little trees won't bother those, so.
All right. Any further thought on this? Are we ready to vote on it tomorrow? We got it in shape where we can do that? Yeah, I got some head nods around. All right. Thank you all. So up next, we have our public comment period, and the only person who's already signed up is Tom Clements. Tom, would you come up?
Thanks very much. I am Tom Clements, Director of Savannah River Site Watch and a former beekeeper. Not a very good one. I took too much honey from the bees. Found out that was not good to do. But anyway, I want to comment on a few things. But first, I just wanted to mention about this enhancing stakeholder public engagement. I appreciate you always thinking about this. It's always been a struggle for the CAB to get members of the community to participate and to attend these meetings. Having attended dozens and dozens of them over the year, I know this is an ongoing problem, and I don't think DOE has been able to solve the issue of how to get people here. But don't beat yourselves up too badly. Part of the problem is the media. In my 30 years of monitoring Savannah Riverside stuff, the media coverage of issues right now is the least robust it has ever been. It's most unfortunate. The Augusta paper doesn't even have a dedicated reporter anymore. The other paper basically covers what DOE says or contractor says, unfortunately. So we know the way that the print media is going, so it's not all your fault or responsibility. On this salt waste processing facility issue, I wish next time you get a presentation on this, ask DOE to go back before the year 2014 when this $2.3 billion baseline was set. You can still find on DOE website that the cost, and I think it was lower than this, was $900 million originally. I appreciated your discussion about who is going to pay for changing these valves, because all these projects, the cost goes up. DOE is not able to manage these expensive high-ticket projects. I can tell you where you can find that $900 million figure. Okay, I wanted to comment on three things after this. You can look on srswatch.org, but you won't read about it in the local media, but there's been a real fight over the role of the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board. And if they're going to have continued good access to DOE information and to DOE facilities. The Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, which my group is a part of around DOE sites, the public interest groups, and the Energy Communities Alliance have written to DOE along with several senators asking DOE not to go forward with an order 140.1 that they want to implement, which is going to restrict the safety board's access and oversight at the DOE sites. I think they serve a vitally important role. If you go to srswatch.org, you can see the link to the Energy Communities Alliance letter, Alliance for Nuclear Accountability letter, and news release. I encourage you to do that. On the MOX issue, you're not reading anything about this in local media either, unfortunately. The budget, and I've got all the documentation here if anybody wanted a packet of it. On September 21st, President Trump signed the energy and water budget, and in it, the MOX project is being cut down to the bone from $340 million to $220 million. Basically, it's just to sustain it. Also allowed, in the language that went along with the report, DOE will be allowed to terminate spending money on construction. So what does that mean for you? This dilute and dispose, where the plutonium is taken out of the 3013 cans and mixed with material taken to WIP, that is likely to be on the increase. Hopefully you'll get more information about what's going on with the MOX project, and I know it's not in your bailiwick, but expect some big changes as far as employment and downsizing of that failed project before October 1st. And I would mention that I just got the notice today, the New Mexico Environment Department has solicited input on dilute and dispose and disposal of that plutonium in WIP. There's differing opinions about this, but they're holding a hearing on a public comment period on October 27th, and shortly after that, I think we can expect a decision by the New Mexico Environment Department about how they're calculating the volume of containers that go into WIP, which is the way that the plutonium would get in there and be disposed of in WIP. And finally, on the issue of Savannah Riverside accepting spent nuclear fuel from Germany, you'll recall, or some of you, that the CAB has voted on this in the past. You voted last July not to accept this material. And it was raised at that time if DOE had conducted a new proliferation assessment about the risks of leaving this material in Germany. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request on August 1st, 2013. DOE said there was no proliferation risk of leaving the material in Germany, and on August 28th, DOE affirmed that we contacted the National Nuclear Security Administration's Office of Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation about my FOIA request. NA-20 searched and did not locate any records responsive. So the August 1st, 2013 memo, there is no proliferation risk to leave the AVR and THTR gas cool reactor spent fuel, which is in the form of a graphite ball, in Germany. There still is a move to bring it here. There's a work for others agreement, which I have not been able to obtain under Freedom of Information Act, between German entities and Savannah Riverside. The research about processing and dumping that material is continuing. I think once things, as I've said before to you, move to any kind of more active export proposal, there are going to be lawsuits brought in Germany to stop this because it's against German law. I have copies of this FOIA response back to me. I'll put some more on the table out there. There are a couple there now, but thanks very much for your time.
Also signed up was Chuck Messick.
Good afternoon, I'm Chuck Messick. I'm just a citizen, so I just want to make a couple of comments. Actually, since Tom brought up the other one, I want to talk about that briefly too. But in regards to your pollinator management program, I didn't quite hear this. I want to make a suggestion on that, if I may, on your item number 4, is maybe suggest to incorporate into the mission statement of whatever committee you have, as far as a chemical usage committee, to consider pollinators in the decision on how you manage the chemicals on site. In addition to that, if you have SRL, or another Forest Service or whoever that may be more knowledgeable in that area, and trust them as part of their mission in that committee to consider that, to make sure it's considered in the overall committee meeting. So I thought that might be a good suggestion to pass on to you. Use that what you will. In regards to the Gemma project, and yes, I do follow that since I was a consultant with EM back in those days, working in that area. But I'm not sure what Tom asked for that, but I'd like to bring you back to the documents that exist today, the official documents from the Department of Energy, EM primarily, which is the Federal Register Notice, which is the FONSI. The Federal Register Notice, I think, came out in January 16, and the FONSI and the EA, both approved by DOE, EM primarily, in, I think it was December 17 this past year. And all of those reference both the HU minimization and the non-proliferation issues of this particular project. And again, since I know about the project in some detail, I think it's a good thing from the site, as well as the technology development that we as the United States of America can use for possibly future nuclear fuels. Thank you.
Becky, I did see your hand. We got time for some brief comments.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Becky Rafter with Georgia Wand. And I just first want to tell all the folks in the room who are from South Carolina that our thoughts are with you with all the flooding that's happening. I don't think that's affecting Columbia, but I do think it's affecting several other areas further south and east. And I wanted to just make a couple of quick comments, which, as a member of the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, also with Tom, along with Tom's group, we agree with we have concerns about DNSB's access to records at the site. And about the EMSSAB recommendation, my 2 cents added into that would be to make sure, if you all do recommend something, to make sure that it is even a survey, to make sure that it's co-created with community members, and so that it'll be more effective if it's probably the reason they didn't have a lot of feedback in Nevada, because it probably wasn't co-created with community. So the questions probably didn't even necessarily resonate. And to make sure that you're reaching out to the community members and not just the grass tops, so that it's people speaking for themselves who are most affected. And it's very hard sometimes to reach these folks, and so it takes extra effort. But I would highly recommend that, and at least trying to have like a 70-30 to, regular folks to like grass tops, what we call grass tops, but what also is considered, like your fire chief or your organizational leader, like me or something like that. Another note is just that we are concerned about the flooding and affecting the nuclear industry. We're paying attention. I've been in touch with the NRC about the Brunswick reactor in North Carolina, how it's situated on the Cape Fear River. And they allayed my fears somewhat, because we were watching the river rise. It's in a major flooding level at this point. But they said that there's seawall that can withstand 22 feet of a storm surge. And I know this didn't affect y'all regarding nuclear power reactors, and of course the river is at over 30 feet. I think it's dropped back down to 29 feet. So, but they said that their seawall is for a storm surge and not for river rise. But I do want to point out that the rivers are rising. And the last time that I was out at the boat dock at Vogel's boat dock at Swaney River, the water was all the way up past the entrance to the river, like not just the boat dock, but the whole parking lot was underwater, and that wasn't as high as I've seen it before. Sometimes you can't even get near the parking lot because the river's up way past, and you can see the trees, it's a swamp. We're in the floodplain. We're in the CSRA floodplain, so just keep that in mind. I wanted to let you all know that we at Georgia Wand have hired a nuclear harm reduction strategist. Her name is Jumana Master. She has a bachelor's degree in public health, and she did some research with us as an intern last year, and we'd be happy to provide copies of that report for you all. But she's not able to be here today, but she'll be here in the future, and she's awesome. And we have changed our frame of our work to a nuclear harm reduction frame, so that we can work together with community members and agency officials and industry officials about how to mitigate the effects on the environment and on humans. Also, my last thing I want to say is I've been the executive director of Georgia Lawn for over 5 years. It's been a pleasure. But recently, I've stepped back. The world that we're facing has too many problems, and we need to make sure that the innovators are in charge. And so my colleague, Lindsay Harper, who's been the deputy director, and before that, the program and communications manager, and before that, she was on our board. She's an innovator, she's an entrepreneur, she has a business degree, she's really brilliant, and she's way better at a lot of this stuff than I am. So there's nothing wrong. This is a plan that we've been having in the works for a couple of years. We really want to advance the equity in our organization that we want to see in the world. So I'll be stepping back to a different position in the organization, and she's going to be the new executive director. So I kind of wanted to formally introduce her as the executive director, and yay, Lindsay. And feel free to hold your applause. And anyway, I love to come to the CAB meetings, and so you'll probably see me more, but it's always a pleasure to be here and to be hanging out with all the nerds. And so thank you very much.
Lindsay.
I mean that with love.
All right. Any comments from around the table before we close out for the day? Anything that we needed to address that we did not address, folks? All right. One more public comment.
This is quick, and any of you that are SCNG ratepayers, the Public Service Commission is having a meeting from 6 to 8 tonight, just across the way. You can look them up in their address.
All right, great.
Yeah, public comment. This is the only chance in Columbia.
The microphone. Okay. All right, folks. Anything else that we need to address before we adjourn for the day? All right. Let's get back to it at 9 a.m. Thank you, everyone. A&O is next door, yes, absolutely.